Chapter 873. Ever since Luo Fan stepped onto the path of cultivation, he had refined many magic treasures. However, the only one that became a great overarching heaven treasure was Void Wuji Palace. As for offensive and defensive treasures, they had many uses when he first started cultivating, allowing him to stay safe in many harsh environments. However, ever since he attained great overarching Dao fruit, he could only use Void Wuji Palace. As for offensive and defensive magic treasures like the Square Seal, they were all discarded by him. The reason was very simple. It was because he found that the power he could unleash had already surpassed the power of those offensive magic treasures. Unless he continuously refined those treasures for millions of years and finally refined them to a level that was compatible with his cultivation, only then would they be of help to him. And clearly, in his current state, if the time he spent refining those treasures to a state that matched his cultivation level was used for cultivation, the increase in his own cultivation level would be enough for him to obtain power that surpassed the increase of those treasures. In this situation, why would Luo Fan choose to refine magic treasures? Of course, he would use the time spent refining magic treasures to cultivate and increase his cultivation. This mentality could be changed in a short period of time, but after this mentality persisted for trillions of years, it had long become common sense. This caused Luo Fan to unknowingly forget that other than increasing his cultivation, there was also the existence of magic treasures that could greatly increase his abilities. Even when he was stuck in a bottleneck and could not increase his cultivation, it was difficult to think of such a method. Because of this, in recent times, Luo Fan's consciousness avatar encountered many difficulties and was injured many times. However, he had never thought of refining a magic treasure to protect himself, nor did he think of using external objects to help him kill. This way, of course, increased the speed of his cultivation, but at the same time, narrowed his path, causing him to encounter more and more difficulties. For example, at this moment, he encountered this Yuan Qi living being that was thousands of times stronger than him. If he had a magic treasure that was compatible with his cultivation realm and surpassed the level of perfection, then he would not be able to use it. How could he be as embarrassed as he was right now? He had already easily wiped out this Yuan Qi living being. It would take hundreds of thousands of years to refine a perfected grade magic treasure, so it would naturally be even more difficult to refine a magic treasure that surpassed the perfected grade. It would take millions or even tens of millions of years to refine a magic treasure. Such a long time if it was in the outside world. Luo Fan could still afford to waste it. However, on the Bridge of Eras, it was far too extravagant. The difference in the flow of time was 10,000 times that of the outside world, making the 1 million or 10 million years equivalent to 10 billion or even 100 billion years in the outside world. This was already several eras, so how could he possibly waste it like this? It could be seen from this. Normally speaking, it was impossible to refine an artifact that surpassed the perfect level. Of course, if they encountered another obstacle like the one in the Starfields of Chaos, then they wouldn't be able to refine it. Naturally, he could easily have endless time and complete this process. But unfortunately, once a fortuitous opportunity was missed, it would be very difficult for it to appear again. Now that the chaotic starfields were over, it would be difficult to find another obstacle of the same nature. Therefore, it could be said that the idea of refining an artifact to aid himself would have many uses for Luo Fan in the future, but for Luo Fan's current predicament, it wasn't very useful. What Luo Fan meant by walking into the wrong path was to overlook this aspect of an artifact. But what he meant by walking into the wrong path was something else. Over the years, because he cultivated the Tao of strength, and with his understanding of strength, almost everything he wanted to do had a specific power that corresponded with it. All he needed to do was call upon that power and control it to do what he wanted to do. So, unknowingly, Luo Fan's use of power had become simple and crude. This kind of simple and crude method, when faced with a perfected great opponent, was always successful. It was easy and straightforward to defeat the opponent. But when faced with an opponent like this Yuan Qi spirit, This kind of simple and crude method would put him in an awkward position. It would be difficult to achieve the desired effect, and he wouldn't be able to defeat the opponent. What Luo Fan realized was that the wrong path he had walked into was this simple and crude method of using power. When combined, power could form a complete world. It could even form a boundless state of chaos that encompassed everything. Taking out all kinds of power and using them alone, it seemed like the power was pure and concentrated, but in reality, it was like picking up sesame seeds and throwing away watermelons. There was no way to bring out the true mysteries of power, and there was no way to bring out the full potential of power. Wasn't this walking into the wrong path? If it weren't for the fact that Luo Fan had great control over his body, he would have blushed. Although the inheritance of Tao Lord Hercules didn't say it explicitly, the meaning revealed between the lines is to use power in combination. But I've been blinded by the purity and only want to use pure power to fight the enemy. It's really... Such a thought lingered in Luo Fan's mind. However, these distracting thoughts were quickly suppressed by him. Inexhaustible power characteristics, inexhaustible runes, talismans, characters, patterns, and patterns quickly flowed between Luo Fan's mind and thoughts. At this moment, it was naturally impossible to instantly create the most powerful combination method that was most suitable for his body's power. The path of power was broad and profound, and every bit of mystery was enough for a cultivator to spend a lifetime studying. In order to create a combination method that could bring out the most power, one must have a deep understanding of the mystery of various powers. And this was obviously not a process that could be completed in a short period of time. However, although there was no way to achieve the most optimal combination, Luo Fan also had a shortcut. That was to directly use power to imitate a magic treasure. With the help of the magic treasure's mysterious natural structure, the majority of the power's power could be brought out. The magic treasure structure could give birth to a treasure spirit, so there was no need to say how mysterious it was. If the power was constructed in a magic treasure structure, naturally, it would allow the magic treasure to bring out far more power than usual. Luo Fan had refined several magic treasures in the past, so he was naturally very familiar with the magic treasure structure. With a thought, thousands of strands of power were emitted from the acupuncture points all over his body and suddenly condensed into a square seal above his head. This square seal was only the size of a fist at first, but as power was poured into it, it grew larger and more tangible, and in the blink of an eye, it had grown to a radius of 10 feet. This seal was extremely simple and unadorned, and the bottom was written with some extremely complicated characters. Extremely mysterious characters were written with the word square. This was the square seal that Luo Fan had refined. However, the aura this absolute square seal gave off was tens of thousands of times more powerful than a real absolute square seal. It was completely compatible with Luo Fan's realm as a destroyer. If it was a real object, it would be impossible for Luo Fan to survive. If it was a real object, it could be said to be a magic treasure that surpassed the great perfection level. After constructing such a magic treasure, Luo Fan's face could not help but turn slightly pale, and he only felt a sense of emptiness in his body. I didn't expect that it would take so much power to construct such a magic treasure. No wonder it takes so long to truly refine a magic treasure that surpasses the great perfection level. A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. Although constructing such a magic treasure had almost exhausted all the power in his body, but the success of the magic treasure's construction proved that his previous idea was correct. At this moment, although the square seal floating above his head was a simulation, its power was already extremely powerful, almost no different from a real magic treasure. At this moment, although the square seal floating above his head was an imitation, its power was already incomparably powerful. It was almost no different from a real magic treasure. Although the square seal floating above his head was a simulation, its power was already extremely powerful, almost no different from a real magic treasure. It was similar to the Yuan Qi living being, just that its level of power had reached the same level. This was because Luo Fan, who was controlling this imitation magic treasure, was merely an annihilator. If he were to face a true void comprehender, he would be courting death. It was impossible to win. However, it must not be forgotten that although this vitality being wielded power that was almost comparable to a void comprehender, his cultivation level was only at the great perfection realm. Compared to Luo Fan, who was an exterminator, he was many times weaker. Using this kind of imitation magic treasure to deal with him was more than enough. The vitality creature was brimming with confidence after taking out the stone-like artifact. After pouring his power into it, he prepared to use it to attack Luo Fan. However, it suddenly discovered that a powerful aura had appeared out of thin air above Luo Fan's head, causing it to feel an intense threat to its life. For a moment, he couldn't help but be secretly shocked. He didn't dare to hesitate anymore and lightly shouted, "You can die now." As he spoke, the artifact shook, causing the surrounding void to turn into spatial powder. It shot towards Luo Fan like a comet. Luo Fan glanced at the artifact and knew that it was extremely powerful. Apart from his surrounding space, there was also the formless and invisible time. Thus, it could be said that this artifact did not need any time from the moment it was launched to the moment it hit its target. As long as it was launched, it would be almost unstoppable. After understanding the artifact's power in a flash, he didn't panic. With a single thought, the square seal appeared in front of him without causing any ripples or any process, directly heading towards the artifact that had turned time and space into powder. Both of them transcended time and collided with each other. In that instant, a soundless shockwave exploded from the point of collision, sweeping out in all directions. The originally viscous liquid Hotian Yuan Qi in the surroundings had completely turned into nothingness during this process. Even space and time had been completely turned into powder after being swept by the shockwave. This caused Luo Fan and the Yuan Qi creature to be wrapped in a thick fog, seeming illusory and real at the same time. How was this possible? This artifact is a treasure that gathers all matter from another space-time. Even if the world is destroyed, it might not necessarily be destroyed. How can you destroy it? Suddenly, the vitality creature let out an indescribable cry of shock. Its expression became indescribably shocked, and it was no longer able to maintain its previous composure, much less put on a faint smile. From its cry, it was clear that Luo Fan had won the previous collision. Luo Fan only smiled slightly, but he couldn't be bothered to answer the vitality creature's questions. The wonders of magic treasures were not something that a native of a forbidden land like Revelation could understand. With a single thought, after colliding with the artifact, the simulated square seal that had only paused for a moment, but had not been damaged in the slightest, instantly arrived above the vitality creature's head and pressed down without hesitation. The vitality creature's strength surpassed Luo Fan's by thousands of times. Originally, even if the artifact was destroyed, it would still be able to make many defensive movements. Even if it was destined to fail in the end, it would definitely be able to resist for a period of time. At most, it would only be too haggard. But at this moment, because the artifact had been broken, it had completely subverted the concept that it had believed to be right and proper for many years, causing its mind to go blank for a moment. There were only thoughts in its mind that were impossible. How could such a thing happen? These thoughts spun in its mind. It was completely unable to effectively respond to Luo Fan's next attack. In the end, when Luo Fan's imitation square seal imprinted on its head, it barely managed to react, and the power in its body surged. The power in its body surged, and it was about to resist. The power in its body surged, but it was already too late to resist. The power of the square seal erupted, and its boundless destructive power directly disintegrated all of the vitality creature's power, its entire body, and even its soul. The creature did not even have the chance to let out a final cry before it was completely erased from the infinite space-time. The moment the vitality creature was erased, the entire space-time shook violently. The extreme force, which had been split into two and hidden, collapsed with a loud bang, following the collapse of the extreme force. There were also the two spacetimes inside and outside, and the entire land of nothingness. The process of the collapse began from where Luo Fan was. Countless fragments and cracks appeared in front of Luo Fan. They began to spread rapidly in all directions. The speed at which they spread was unimaginably fast, almost surpassing time. The space-time within a radius of tens of thousands of light years completely collapsed within a few breaths. At the same time, the space-time of nothingness where the martial Empress, Sky Maiden, and the other Khanate Zenith Heaven cultivators were also collapsed. At the same time, an indescribable power descended into Luo Fan's body out of nowhere, and it quickly burrowed into Luo Fan's soul. That power was the origin of the land of nothingness. It contained boundless information about the land of nothingness, the endless laws and mysteries of the land of nothingness, as well as boundless vitality and the extreme force. Normally, Luo Fan would need to use his power to slowly draw out the origin of the land of nothingness like fishing. At this moment, he did not need to do that at all, because he had comprehended a deeper level of the mysteries of using his power. With just a thought, the square seal appeared in the world of his sea of consciousness. With another spin, it transformed into a cloth bag. With a swift movement, the essence of the world of nothingness was sucked into the bag, and it was no longer able to affect his body or soul in the slightest. This cloth bag was none other than a universe bag that Luo Fan had once designed. It was an arcane treasure that he had refined using the sleeve universe as a fundamental technique. The bag contained boundless space, and it could even store the universe, let alone the origin of a mere forbidden land. After the origin of the land of nothingness was sucked into the bag, the imitation bag did not even shake. It easily suppressed the origin of the land of nothingness that could even assimilate Luo Fan's soul. No matter how it struggled in the bag, it could no longer affect the outside world. With a wave of his hand, the bag landed in his hand. I really was a reckless waste of God's gifts in the past. Holding the bag, Luo Fan could not help but sigh with emotion. At that moment, the power in his body was gradually growing again. Although it was growing at an extremely slow speed, and he had to expend a lot of energy to maintain this cosmos bag, compared to the previous method, this method was countless times more ingenious and convenient. When he absorbed the origin of the forbidden land before, the method he used was to directly devour and assimilate it with his own power. At this moment, the bag was formed from his power, so there was naturally no need to devour and assimilate it in one go. However, as long as the origin of the land of nothingness was consumed in the bag, it would naturally be completely absorbed and all the mysteries within it would be comprehended. Strictly speaking, the Cosmos Sack was also a heavenly abode treasure, but the infinite space within it could actually be seen as an incomplete, distorted, boundless world. In terms of function, the Cosmos bag that Luo Fan simulated was no different from a real Cosmos bag that surpassed the great perfection level. The infinite space inside was also a distorted, boundless world. Naturally, it also had the various functions of a Grotto Heaven treasure. As a Grotto Heaven treasure, the most basic function that it had to have was to move time, to speed up or slow down the flow of time. With a thought, the flow of time within the bag accelerated to billions of times that of the outside world. Under such a rapid flow of time, only a few breaths had passed in the outside world, but countless years had passed in the Chinquan bag. After such a long time, the origin energy of the land of nothingness gradually dissipated and finally fused with the space within the Cosmos Sack. In other words, it had fused with the Cosmos Sack. Chapter 874. Nearly half of what Luo Fan had harvested from the Forbidden Area's essence was something that he hadn't absorbed when he had brutally absorbed the Forbidden Area's essence. For example, there was no information about how the Forbidden Lands were born or how they would perish in the future. This information was missing when he'd absorbed the origin source of the chaotic starfields and the 6 absolute nebula. Was it because the void was different that the information contained in its origin source was different from the other Forbidden Lands? It was obviously unlikely that he would die. After all, they were both forbidden lands. How could there be such a huge difference? Since it wasn't the forbidden lands that caused the information contained in the origin source to be different, it was naturally another situation. It was the method he'd used to absorb the origin source. Previously, Luo Fan had used the crude and simple method of absorption. It was simple and direct, and it seemed like he'd completely absorbed everything contained in the origin source. But now, it seemed that the crude and simple method had wasted a small portion of the important information in the origin source. When he understood this, Luo Fan couldn't help but feel a little regretful. But it was only a pity. He didn't regret it. In that situation, the crude and simple method was more advantageous. After all, he'd been on the verge of a breakthrough. Although the crude and simple method had wasted a lot of useful information, it had provided him with a huge push, pushing him through the bottleneck and allowing him to achieve a breakthrough. If he'd used the same method before, he would have been able to absorb the origin source perfectly, but he'd also lost that push. In that case, he might not have broken through to the peak of the 8th Order Immortal Realm. With a thought, he raised his hand and waved it. The universal pouch turned back into countless strands of energy and suddenly burrowed into his body. As it flowed, it once again converged into the energy that was close to the source of power. It flowed ceaselessly within his body, making him feel almost omnipotent. When he turned around, he saw that the other Khanate Grand Luo cultivators had appeared behind him. They still looked tired, but compared to the end of the previous test, they were in a much better state. Although the void they were in was empty, devoid of yuan qi, it wasn't difficult for Khanate Grand Luo cultivators to be self-sufficient and generate their own yuan qi. Hence, even though they were in the void, they were still barely able to regulate their breathing and recuperate. Of course, because he had to lock onto his surroundings at all times, the effects of this kind of recuperation weren't very good. However, after more than a month, there were still some effects. I wonder what kind of mysteries the land of nothingness had. I'm ashamed, but I couldn't figure it out at all. I didn't learn anything after more than a month. Old Man Omniscient saw that Luo Fan had returned to his senses. It was obvious that he had digested what he had obtained from destroying the forbidden area, so he came forward to ask. At this point, Old Man Omniscient was already full of admiration for Luo Fan. That was why he was able to ask the question so easily. Luo Fan heard Old Man All-Knowing's words and looked at the expressions of the people around him. He knew what they were thinking, but he felt helpless. He did not lack living beings who treated him as their masters. He did not step onto the Era Bridge with these Khanate Grand Luo cultivators to lead some disciples to the Era Vortex. Instead, it was to help each other and make up for each other's weaknesses so that they could enter the Era Vortex more easily. Now that these Khanate Grand Luo cultivators were treating him like that, they were unknowingly relying on him. This would have a negative effect on the subsequent trials, causing them to be less helpful in clearing the trials. How could he not feel helpless about that? However, it was clearly not appropriate for him to say it out loud. Moreover, this kind of mentality was not something that could be changed with just a few words. They could only wait for them to slowly see the truth and recognize themselves. Only then would they be able to change their mentality. If he were to say it out loud, it would only offend them, but it would not have a positive effect on the truth. Hence, after smiling bitterly, Luo Fan could only explain the various mysteries of the void. Naturally, it was impossible for him to say that it was related to his own cultivation and his own understanding. After listening to Luo Fan's explanation, Old Man Omniscient and the others came to a realization. At the same time, they felt fortunate and regretful. They naturally felt fortunate that they did not enter the space-time where there were countless perfected stage living beings. They knew very well that if they had entered, it would basically be difficult for them to come out in one piece. Not to mention the living beings that surpassed the innate Golden Immortal Realm, just the numerous living beings at the perfected Golden Immortal Realm would very likely be able to kill more than half of them. The regretful thing was for the same reason. After all, it was a completely new space-time. Without finding that space-time, the void they experienced was not complete at all. It was only a part of it. How could they not feel regretful when they did not even know what it looked like in its entirety after going through a trial. After Luo Fan finished explaining everything, the martial emperor sighed leisurely and said, "I didn't expect that I've missed out on so much. Looks like I'll have to work harder from now on." Luo Fan was secretly delighted when he heard the martial emperor's words. At the very least, the martial emperor did not become dependent like the others. He still maintained his original self-confidence and would not become discouraged or dependent because of his own achievements. Apart from the martial emperor, the Skyfire Taoist and the Empty Maiden maintained the same mentality. The Skyfire Taoist had a firm will and would not be easily influenced by others. The Empty Maiden, on the other hand, was unwilling to succumb to the feelings she had for Luo Fan. She instinctively did not want to be looked down upon by Luo Fan, so she maintained her self-improvement mentality and did not become dependent on him. Apart from them, the rest of the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators, including Old Man Omniscient, had more or less become dependent on Luo Fan. Luo Fan saw through everyone's thoughts and remembered them. However, there was no change in his expression at all. With a slight thought, an invisible touch was transmitted to the treasure spirit of the Era Bridge. This was the first time he had actively transmitted his thoughts to the artifact spirit of the Bridge of Times. Although the artifact spirit had been paying attention to him and would only transmit the situation of the checkpoint when it was convenient for him, Luo Fan was, after all, passive and not truly active. It was only at this moment that Luo Fan gained a deeper understanding of the treasure spirit of a magic treasure after gaining various insights. It was the first time he was able to transmit his thoughts to the treasure spirit. However, it was only barely transmitted. The treasure spirit of the Era Bridge might be able to sense Luo Fan's thoughts, but it was impossible for it to perfectly receive his thoughts. Fortunately, the treasure spirit was a treasure spirit that surpassed the level of great perfection. Its thinking ability was definitely not weak, and it could completely guess the meaning that Luo Fan wanted to transmit. Therefore, after Luo Fan's thoughts were transmitted, the treasure spirit of the Era Bridge's voice came from the void. "This is the 3,337th trial, the Rocky Sky. The way to pass it is to destroy this place." Luo Fan looked around and found that he was in a strange place. In the boundless void, there were balls of strange white objects. It floated like a cloud. These white clouds should be the origin of the name of the sky, Luo Fan thought. He turned his gaze away and carefully observed the void. He discovered that the void was not colorless and transparent like the other void. Instead, it faintly gave off a faint stone-like luster. It was as if the void was not empty, but filled with countless stone-like powder. It looked extremely mysterious. "The rocky sky here is not like the previous trials. Please be careful, fellow Taoists," Luo Fan said. He nodded to the martial monarch. His figure flashed and directly merged into the void. He disappeared before everyone's eyes. At that moment, apart from the martial monarch, the Sky Maiden, and the Heavenfire Taoist, the other Khanate Grand Luo cultivators had developed an inexplicable dependence on Luo Fan. It was extremely difficult for Luo Fan to cut off their mentality, but it was relatively easy to start. He would not give them the chance to rely on him. He would leave on his own at the beginning of the trial and let them figure out what to do on their own. This process might not be obvious in a short period of time, but as time went on, and as the number of times increased, there would definitely be some effect. Of course, how long would it take? How many times would it take for there to be an obvious effect would depend on their own willpower. It was not something that Luo Fan could be sure of. I hope it will develop in a good direction. Such a helpless thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. After that, he completely devoted his energy to the rocky sky checkpoint in front of him. From the 3,334th trial onwards, the trials after that existed in the River of Time. They were projections of some forbidden places in the universe on Earth. At the very least, from the current few trials. It was like this. Such a projection was countless times more realistic than the era projections of the past. The living beings projected were also countless times more realistic than the living beings projected by the era projections of the past. Therefore, the most troublesome thing for the era projections was to find the core of the era projections and resist the backlash of the era projections when the core was destroyed. The living beings projected by the era projections were rarely able to affect connate grand luo cultivators. On the other hand, because the projections of the living beings after the 3334th level tended to be more realistic, the true problem for Golden Immortal Realm cultivators wasn't the location of the core within these levels. Instead, it was the living beings projected by the forbidden places that might appear. The living beings in the forbidden places were born in the forbidden places, so they were innately connected to the forbidden places. In the forbidden places, they would definitely be able to unleash power that was several times more powerful than other places. The most obvious example was the 3334th trial, the Six Absolutes Nebula. At that time, among the Six Absolutes demons that were born and raised in the Six Absolutes Nebula, the strongest was only comparable to the Perishment Realm. On the other hand, it was mostly the pure Sun Devil race that attacked the numerous connate Golden Immortal Realm cultivators. Even so, the connate Grand Luo cultivators were busy dealing with the Six Absolutes Nebula. Basically, they could only protect themselves, but they could not put too much effort into searching for the core of the Six Absolutes Nebula. He was only a pure Yang stage 6 Absolute demon. Yet he was able to unleash power that even connate Grand Luo Realm cultivators had to be careful against in the Six Absolute Nebula. From this, it could be seen just how shocking the power that beings born and bred in the Forbidden Area could unleash in the Forbidden Area. It was precisely because the key was the possible existence of the native living beings in the Forbidden Places that Luo Fan paid attention to the Forbidden Places. However, he did not pay attention to the general power that made the Forbidden Places Forbidden Places. Instead, he carefully searched for traces of the existence of living beings. He wanted to confirm if there were living beings in the Forbidden Places, and if there were, how strong were the living beings? Of course, apart from that, he wanted to confirm the question he had at the end of the 3336 trial. The next trial was whether the resistance of the Forbidden Places was fused with some powerful living beings. He wanted to borrow the will of the living beings to fully unleash the resistance of the Forbidden Places. With all sorts of thoughts in his mind, Luo Fan kept wandering around the rocky sky. As a forbidden place, whether there were living beings or not, it was impossible for it to be revealed without concealment. If the living beings in the Forbidden Places were directly seen by other living beings, then the Forbidden Places would not be called Forbidden Places. In that case, this forbidden area could not possibly be called a forbidden area. At most, it could only be called a place where some kind of living beings gathered. Only the unknown and mystery could instill fear in people, and only these forbidden places could become forbidden places. Therefore, even after spending several days and not finding the existence of living beings in the sky, Luo Fan still did not come to the conclusion that there were no living beings in the rocky sky. Instead, he continued to search for traces of living beings that might or might not exist. Of course, during this process. In fact, Luo Fan was not completely idle. On the contrary, in the process of searching for traces of the existence of living beings, most of his attention was placed on something else, deducing the combination of various powers in order to create a method that could fully unleash the power. At the previous trial, he had already realized that he had embarked on a wrong path, and that he had gone in the wrong direction in the use of power. He understood that if he wanted to fully unleash the power, what was needed was not purity, but an orderly combination. Only by finding the most suitable combination, only by finding the most suitable construction method, could the full power of that power be unleashed. However, at that time, because he had just realized this, he was in a hurry and could not find a combination of powers that could unleash great power. Therefore, he had to settle for the next best thing. He used power to imitate magic treasures to combine the power. so that the power could unleash more power than when he used it alone. This could be considered as having barely completed part of his vision, and, at the same time, he completed the mission of passing the 3,336 trial. It was obvious that using his power to imitate a magic treasure was just a hasty choice after all, although he could unleash a part of the power that way. But he was still far from unleashing the full power, and it also caused a lot of waste of power. Previously, after Luo Fan condensed the square seal, he felt powerless, his face was pale, and his body was extremely weak. This was the reason. It was precisely because of this. Just now, he had seized the time to deduce the mystery of the structure of power during the journey. The power in Luo Fan's body was a power that was close to the source of power. In other words, this power could be described as a power that could transform into almost all kinds of power. Under such circumstances, the power combinations that Luo Fan could complete were almost endless. It was obviously impossible to exhaust all the combinations and find the most suitable structure to unleash the power, even if he spent countless years on it. Even if Luo Fan spent the rest of his life on it, it would still be impossible to complete this vast project. Therefore, if Luo Fan wanted to improve his power, he could only choose a few types of power that were good for killing, defense, or other commonly used functions according to his past accumulation. After analyzing and deducing them, he would then find the most suitable structure to unleash the power of these few types of power to the limit. Apart from these commonly used powers, the other combinations of power could only be combined in the future when he encountered, comprehended, and was inspired. With such a choice, the difficulty was countless times lower. It had reached a level where he could achieve success in a short period of time. However, even if he had already determined the entirety of several types of power, it was still rather difficult to find a power that could perfectly correspond to them if it came out of nowhere. Therefore, in the process of searching for combinations, Luo Fan first used the infinite knowledge of refining that he had accumulated to create a magic treasure that could greatly increase the power of the power. Then, he deduced from the magic treasure how to combine the power to possess the power of the magic treasure without forming the magic treasure. In this way, although he took a few turns, it reduced the difficulty of finding combinations again. Most of the magic treasure knowledge was summarized by the predecessors. Therefore, Luo Fan's process of first building a magic treasure and then deducing with the help of the magic treasure could be said to be using the wisdom of countless predecessors to help him find combinations. The difficulty was naturally much easier than looking for combinations out of nothing. In these few days, Luo Fan found a power combination that could completely unleash the power of destruction. It included 17 other types of power, such as elasticity, extensibility, extension, physical strength, martial strength, and so on. The combination method was also extremely complicated and mysterious. Once it was performed, a ray of light would directly blast towards the opponent as if it had transcended time. If it could not be blocked, it would directly erase the opponent from all space-time. Even if it could be blocked, it would require a power that was tens of thousands of times stronger than the total of 18 types of power to be able to offset the light. To be continued, Chapter 875. Please remember the domain name of this website or search on Baidu. This light with the destructive power as the main force and the other 17 forces as support could be called the Light of Destruction. The Light of Destruction was also the name of the magic treasure that Luo Fan designed based on the destructive power and the chi training knowledge that he obtained from Pengu's primordial spirit. Even with the most perfect structure, if Luo Fan used the previous method to directly use his power to simulate the Light of Destruction, the power consumed would directly drain his body completely, and the situation at the last moment of the 3,336 pass would repeat itself. The Light of Destruction that he created in the past few days, with the help of the 17 other forces, would be more powerful than the power that could be exerted by simulating magic treasures. Moreover, the power consumed to condense the Light of Destruction would be more than 100 times less than that of simulating magic treasures. In other words, if he were to use the method that Luo Fan had just deduced to emit the Light of Destruction, the power consumed would be at most 1% of the power in his body. For Luo Fan, this kind of consumption would only take a few minutes to completely recover. Even if he did not recover, it would not affect his strength much. The difference in efficiency between the two methods could be imagined. After weighing the difference in the consumption of the two methods, Luo Fan could not help but be eager to give it a try. He had the idea of testing the power of the light of destruction. With this idea, in a situation where he had no scruples, he naturally would not be stingy to put it into practice. Therefore, Luo Fan looked around and picked a white cloud with a radius of 1,000,000 miles, hundreds of thousands of miles in front of him on the left. He raised his hand and pointed. As the power in his body flowed, it naturally condensed into 18 kinds of forces that merged together in an extremely mysterious way. It directly rushed out of his finger and turned into a black brilliance that emitted an endless aura of destruction. Almost without any time, it blasted on the white cloud. In an instant, the white cloud seemed to be stagnant. Then, silently, the white cloud became smaller and smaller, smaller and smaller. In a few breaths, it had completely disappeared, as if the white cloud had never existed in that position. A cloud with a radius of millions of miles was erased from time and space so easily and quickly. It was not hard to imagine the power of this destructive light. However, at this moment, although Luo Fan was delighted by the power of the destructive light, his brows were slightly furrowed, as if he had encountered something difficult to understand. After thinking for a long time, he nodded and raised his head to look around. Then he took a step forward and crossed the void in an instant, arriving at a location several light years away. Here, there was a particularly large white cloud that was nearly a light year in diameter. The cloud was so huge that it floated above it. No matter where one looked, there were only white clouds. If one didn't have an understanding of the rocky sky, one might think that the entire world was filled with white clouds. When he arrived, Luo Fan slapped down casually, and the destructive light that he had previously condensed pounced forward. In an instant, it crossed time and space and drilled into the white cloud that was several light years in diameter. The scene that happened before happened again. The white cloud shrank with its flesh, and the shrinking speed was so fast that in just a few dozen breaths, the huge white cloud with a radius of nearly a light year had shrunk to the point where Luo Fan could see its edge with his naked eye. In another few breaths, it had completely disappeared without a trace, as if it had never existed. As expected, there are living creatures in this rocky sky. Luo Fan had used the destructive light to erase 2 white clouds in succession. Obviously, it was not for fun. If he had only wanted to determine the power of the destructive light, it was obvious that the erasure of the first white cloud was enough for him to come to a conclusion. The act of erasing the second white cloud seemed a little redundant. The reason why he wiped off one white cloud after another was very simple. When he wiped off the first white cloud, he suddenly felt some kind of mysterious fluctuation coming from the white cloud. The fluctuation was extremely weak and disappeared in a flash. One could not help but wonder if the fluctuation was just an illusion. The appearance of the fluctuation reminded Luo Fan of the mysterious fluctuation he sensed in the void at the previous checkpoint. Although the nature of the two was completely different, they both appeared when he had not made a breakthrough for a long time and had not found what he was looking for. The fluctuation at the previous checkpoint indicated the existence of another space-time. What did the fluctuation at this checkpoint indicate? It was because of this doubt that Luo Fan chose to use the destructive light on this big white cloud without hesitation. The result was extremely gratifying. In the process of the white cloud being erased by the destructive light, the fluctuation appeared again. Moreover, because this white cloud was big, it took a long time to erase it. Therefore, the fluctuation lasted for a long time. Dozens of breaths were just a few breaths for ordinary people. However, for Luo Fan, this short period of time was enough for him to open up a new world. The fluctuation that appeared for such a long time had already allowed Luo Fan to find the source of the fluctuation. At the same time, he had also determined what the fluctuation represented. The source of the fluctuation was none other than these white clouds. To be more specific, it was emitted during the process of the white clouds being erased. The fluctuation was extremely mysterious. It was not an ordinary fluctuation caused by the destruction of matter. Instead, it was a fluctuation that contained some kind of weak consciousness or some kind of instinct. In other words, it could be seen as some kind of mysterious language. The consciousness contained in the language was too weak and vague. Even if Luo Fan had dozens of breaths to comprehend and sense it, in the end, Luo Fan could only barely understand that the consciousness was similar to a farewell and warning. The fluctuation obviously indicated that these white clouds were alive, or in other words, had spiritual consciousness. These white clouds were one of the native life forms in the rocky sky. The white clouds were the form of these life forms. The reason why they were one of the native life forms was very simple. The fluctuation from the white clouds was not transmitted to other white clouds, but to an extremely subtle place in the void. Locking his gaze on that place, Luo Fan took a step forward. He crossed the void and arrived in that place. At first glance, this place seemed no different from other places. It was the same stone material, the same nothingness, and even the stability of the space was no different from other places. If it was not for the fact that Luo Fan was extremely certain that this was the destination of the fluctuation, he would not have believed that there would be abnormalities and that there might be life here. With a thought, Luo Fan's perspective instantly changed. The perspective brought by the realm of death directly replaced his original perspective. From a perspective of the annihilation realm, the entire rocky sky was no longer incorporeal. Instead, it was filled with endless rules and laws. The endless rules and laws were constructed in an extremely profound and complicated way. At first glance, they seemed to be no different from the normal Earth's universe. However, if one took a closer look, they would discover that almost every law and law was slightly different from the normal Earth's universe. This difference was extremely subtle. Each strand was only slightly different, but when combined, it caused the entire structure of the laws and laws to give off a completely different feeling. The structure of the laws and laws of the Earth's universe gave off a feeling of vastness and profundity. However, the structure of the laws and laws in front of him gave off a feeling of toughness and stability. It was like a rock that stood on the top of a mountain and endured the corrosion of countless years without shaking at all. Luo Fan carefully observed the structure of the rules and laws. The most special thing was to pay attention to what he had observed before, the target position of the fluctuation. Indeed, from this perspective, the structure of the laws and laws in that location was slightly different from other locations. This difference was extremely subtle. If one looked at it from a magnitude of the change, it would be difficult to detect it. However, looking at it as a whole, one would discover that the subtle change in this location caused the rhythm of the laws and laws in this area to show a trace of disharmony. This meant that there was definitely something special about this location, and that was perhaps the reason why the fluctuation had been transmitted here. Looks like there's either another space-time hidden behind this, or this is a crucial node. Luo Fan guessed. He raised his hand and pointed. An analytical force directly covered that location, wrapping around every law and law. In an instant, endless information about the laws and laws was transmitted into his mind through the analytical force. As the analysis progressed, Luo Fan's understanding of that location grew at an unimaginable speed. The entire process lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. On the third day, Luo Fan, who had enveloped that location with his analytical force, suddenly felt his heart jolt. A look of joy appeared on his face. After 3 days and 3 nights of analysis, he had finally found the source of the abnormality in that location. Looks like I have to find the combination that can best display the power of this analytical force. It took me 3 days and 3 nights to analyze the structure of the laws and laws in this location. It's too slow. I can't display much of the power of this analytical force at all. Amidst his joy, Luo Fan was also a little dissatisfied. The analytical force was a power that specialized in analyzing everything. It could constantly connect with all the free information in space-time that it had experienced. When it covered something, it could combine the endless free information with that thing. If the information was compatible, it would be kept, and if the information was incompatible, it would be discarded. Such a method was like using the exhaustive method to analyze the mysteries of something. That was why it was called the analytical force. After understanding the power of the analytical force, Luo Fan naturally knew that such an analytical method was not the best one. In other words, if the power of the analytical force was left to its own nature, it was not the most efficient way to display the power of the analytical force. The reason was obvious. The exhaustive method was obviously not the most efficient way to find the solution to the problem. However, this problem could only be solved in the future when there was time. At this moment, what was important was the mystery of the location in front of him. The structure of the rules and laws there was subtle and unfathomable. The way it was constructed was an extremely intricate structure that transmitted information in waves. Through this structure, endless information and waves could be transmitted to several extremely distant locations. Those locations might be extremely close to here, or even close to here, which was not surprising. They might also be extremely far away, or even tens of millions of light years away, which was not something unbelievable. With a thought in his mind, Luo Fan slightly changed the nature of his perception according to the various things that the analytical force had analyzed before. Bit by bit, he slowly injected his perception into a special place in the structure of the laws and laws. In an instant, a huge network appeared in his perception. This network was so huge that it even enveloped an area of tens of thousands of light years. It almost completely enveloped every part of the void in the entire rocky sky. The nodes of these networks were none other than the special structure of the laws and laws that Luo Fan's perception had invaded at this moment. Each node had extremely subtle details from the structure that Luo Fan had at this moment, but it was enough to distinguish them. In this situation, it could be said that these nodes were clearly network terminals in the mortal world, and each terminal had a fixed signature. After a slight calculation, Luo Fan found that there were trillions of such structures. It's incredible. If the mortal world can use such a network, then distance will no longer be an obstacle to communication. Luo Fan secretly exclaimed as such a thought appeared in his mind. However, this thought was only equivalent to a distracting thought and did not linger in his mind for too long. Very soon, he had already focused his attention on the key of this huge network. It was a position near the edge of the huge network. There were extremely dense nodes there, and there was a strange depression in a certain position, as if some extremely heavy existence was pressing down on the entire network, causing a strange hole to appear in the network there. The other positions were flat, and only this place was depressed. Who would believe that there was nothing unusual in that position? However, even though he knew that there was an anomaly in that position, Luo Fan discovered that his perception could not cut into the depression at all. It was as if there was a special rule in the depression that made it so that his perception could only observe from afar and could not get close to see the details. Faced with such a place, Luo Fan had no reason to refuse to go there. With a thought, he did not retreat from the perspective brought by entering and exiting the realm of death. Instead, he directly walked toward the position that was tens of thousands of light years away from here. From this perspective, he could see many times more things than normal. Because his eyes could see so much, the places he stepped on were naturally where he could see the most suitable places to move forward. Advancing in this way, it only took him less than 15 minutes to cross tens of thousands of light years, from one side of the rocky sky to the other side. When he arrived and saw what the depression in the network looked like, he could not help but be slightly stunned. From the perspective of the realm of annihilation, the stony aura emitted by the void before him was several times stronger than that of other places. The structure of the rules and laws was vastly different from that of the Earth's universe. It was as if there was a thin layer of white paper covering the structure of the rules and laws, creating some kind of extremely subtle concealment. Luo Fan frowned slightly and carefully observed the structure of the laws. This time, he did not need to use the power of analysis. He directly analyzed the structure of the laws through his own observation. As the analysis progressed, his frown grew deeper and deeper. Several hours later, his eyes suddenly lit up and the corners of his mouth pulled up into a faint smile. He muttered, "So that's how it is. This kind of concealment method is indeed impossible to guard against. No wonder the network here has such a depression." As he spoke, he lifted his foot and gently strode forward. His figure drifted forward, but he did not land where he should normally land. Instead, he gradually turned into nothingness. By the time his feet had completely stabilized, his entire figure had already disappeared from the colored rocky sky. It was naturally impossible for Luo Fan to disappear into the rocky sky. It seemed like he had disappeared without a trace, but in reality, he had arrived at another place. This was another space-time, another world. This world was completely different from the rocky sky. There was a sky, a land, and countless living beings. However, the sky here was the color of stone, and the ground here was completely made up of all sorts of strange rocks piled together. Even the living beings here were all in the shape of stone beasts. In other words, this was a world of rocks. Everything was made of rocks. It was a strange world that Luo Fan had guessed, but had not seen with his own eyes. This world was not in another place, nor was it in another space-time. In fact, this world was still a part of the rocky sky, but it was hidden under the rocky sky on the surface. More specifically, it was hidden in the rocky sky below the network depression. It was a world that completely overlapped with the network depression. The network seemed to be covered by a thin layer of paper. The reason why it looked a little blurry was that the nomological laws didn't exist in a single entity. Instead, two completely identical nomological laws overlapped in one place. To be continued. For the latest chapter, please log in. Chapter 876. Please remember the domain name, or search on Baidu. It was this overlapping of laws that caused Luo Fan to feel that there was something behind these laws when he looked at them. He felt that these laws had not revealed all their mysteries. It was only now that he instinctively felt that these laws seemed to be covered by a thin layer of paper, as if they were very blurry. Although this space-time belonged to a different space-time from the rocky sky, they almost completely overlapped. Whether it was the laws or the laws, they were almost the same and there was not much difference. However, these almost identical and indistinguishable laws had caused these two space-times to show such a huge difference. This made Luo Fan secretly exclaim, and he was shocked by the mysteries of this universe. He had entered the space-time and was in a strange void. It did not connect to the sky, nor did it connect to the ground. He stood in the air, and there was nothing around him. A gentle breeze blew past, but there was a feeling of sand and stones blowing against his face. It was obvious that even the breeze and the air in this space-time were dyed with the aura of stone and were inseparable from the nature of the rocky sky. Right at this moment, a furious roar filled with sorrow suddenly rang out. The earth surged, and a huge palm suddenly rushed up from the ground, pouncing towards Luo Fan, who was standing in the void. In the blink of an eye, it had already arrived beside Luo Fan, and suddenly pressed down, wanting to gather Luo Fan in one place and crush him into powder. The palm was sparkling and translucent like a crystal, but its toughness had reached an unimaginable level for ordinary living beings. It was as if it was an existence that was tens of thousands of times tougher than diamond. Facing such a large hand, Luo Fan's expression did not change in the slightest, but he had already raised his vigilance to the highest level in his mind in a second. This was because he realized that the power contained in this huge hand had completely fused with the rocky sky. If he was caught by this huge hand, it was equivalent to being crushed by all the power of the rocky sky. Given Luo Fan's realm, facing the full power of this rocky sky was not something he could take lightly. Moreover, The owner of the hand was obviously indescribably sad and indignant. If he merged his anger completely into that power, he could unleash power that was several times, even dozens of times stronger. The degree of concentration was not any weaker than what he could achieve when he was in the Death Realm. Naturally, the threat to him was even greater. With a thought, Luo Fan took a step forward. As he moved, he stirred the rules and laws around him, bringing his body across a distance of several tens of thousands of feet. He dodged the gigantic palm. The palm abruptly paused, then turned again, abruptly turning from its original extreme speed to the other side, toward where Luo Fan was hiding, and continued to press down on Luo Fan. In the blink of an eye, it had already arrived beside Luo Fan and was about to continue pressing down on Luo Fan. As it spun, the ground churned even more violently. An incomparably huge existence slowly emerged from the ground. When Luo Fan once again used the same method to avoid the big hand's grasp, the huge object revealed the tip of the iceberg. It was a huge head, a sparkling and translucent humanoid head, which seemed to be made of a strange stone that was thousands of times harder than diamond, slowly emerged from the ground. The head was like a mountain. It was several tens of thousands of feet in diameter, corresponding to the size of the hand. It was obvious that the hand had come from the existence with the head. The huge head's face was filled with grief and indignation. The place where it had emerged from was originally filled with countless rock life forms. Given its huge size, if it wanted to emerge, it would definitely cause great harm to those life forms. However, when it emerged, a wave of power enveloped the countless rock life forms. Then, it brought the rock life forms away from the place it had emerged from. In an instant, it had traveled several tens of thousands of miles. It had arrived at an extremely safe place. The churning of the ground grew more and more intense. More and more things emerged from under the head. Not long after, a mighty giant clad in ancient armor, tens of millions of meters tall, rose from the ground. This giant was so tall that when it stood up, Luo Fan only reached its knees. One had to raise one's head almost parallel to the ground in order to see where its head was. At this moment, the giant faced the sky and roared, "Outsider! How dare you wantonly exterminate my people and my world? Hand over your life." As it spoke, it raised its two arms and slammed them towards Luo Fan at an unimaginable speed. At this moment, with both hands moving at the same time, the might, power, and speed were many times stronger than when he had only used one hand. The laws between the two palms seemed to have been completely locked down at that moment. Boundless laws were being compressed madly, trying to wrap around Luo Fan and lock Luo Fan in place like a mosquito trapped in amber. It seemed like the laws between the two palms had been completely cut off from the outside world. It had become a world of its own, a world of its own. At the same time, this self-formed world and self-formed space-time was being compressed at an unimaginable speed and strength. The compression was so powerful and fast that it was unimaginable for any living being. If Luo Fan was only an innate Grand Luo, he would have been crushed into dust the moment the pressure appeared. His body would have been reduced to dust, and even his soul would not have been able to remain unharmed. However, Luo Fan was clearly not an innate Grand Luo. He was a destroyer, a powerful destroyer who had almost reached the threshold of the void-comprehending realm. An existence like that was more than 10,000 times stronger than ordinary innate Grand Luo cultivators, but the pressure was only a slight pressure to him. However, it was only for now. The pressure was increasing at an unimaginable speed. Very soon, the pressure that Luo Fan felt grew stronger and stronger. If this continued, when the two palms finally merged, just the pressure alone would be enough to crush his body into dust, let alone the power from the palms. It's actually so powerful. Looks like this being's fusion with the rocky sky is much stronger than I imagined. Luo Fan frowned. The situation before him, although the giant posed a great threat to him, it was only secondary. More importantly, it troubled Luo Fan even more. This situation greatly increased the possibility of his suspicions from the previous trial coming true. The next trial, the core of the Forbidden Land, and the resistance of the Forbidden Land might have fused with some powerful life within the Forbidden Land, making it many times more difficult to deal with than before. This was what gave Luo Fan the biggest headache. If this possibility really came true, then the next trial, if other innate Grand Luo cultivators could not achieve a fundamental breakthrough, they would not be of any use in passing the trials. It was the same for martial emperors, and this meant that he could only rely on himself for the next test. He could only rely on his own efforts to break through the checkpoint after checkpoint, to destroy one forbidden area after another. He would no longer be able to obtain any support or help. Although he had passed most of the 3,000 or so trials before, there were still others around. After all, they had contributed a little, so the feeling was naturally different. When Luo Fan understood this, he suddenly felt a great increase in pressure. He could not help but sigh and shake his head. His body suddenly trembled, and the power around him no longer held back. It formed a light of destruction according to the combination he had researched before, and it enveloped his entire body. It directly enveloped the endless laws of nature that were pressing towards him intensely. In the view of the world of power, those laws were just different kinds of power. The light of destruction that Luo Fan researched had a great destructive ability against power. With this combination, the light of destruction had instantly cut off the countless laws of nature that were pressing him intensely. As the laws of nature were cut off, Luo Fan suddenly felt empty around him. The boundless pressure disappeared without a trace in an instant. So this is how you kill my people. No wonder they couldn't escape at all. You deserve to die. The giant suddenly roared, and the anger in his voice was even more intense. As he spoke, he opened his mouth wide, and an extremely hot breath suddenly gushed out from his mouth. As soon as the breath appeared, it burned the surrounding void into nothingness. The laws of nature could not even maintain their tenacity under the breath. Instead, it was like ice being bathed in fire. They directly withered, melted, and finally collapsed, losing their original structure and turning into nothingness. As the laws of nature melted, the surrounding space-time gradually distorted, and one could even vaguely see the space-time with countless clouds in the outside world that Luo Fan had seen before entering the space-time. The breath was faster than light. As soon as it appeared, it had already pounced between Luo Fan's hands and directly attacked the light of destruction around Luo Fan's body. Yeah, this breath has the same effect as the light of destruction. When he sensed the breath, Luo Fan could not help but be slightly shocked. Luo Fan had never seen this breath before, let alone be familiar with it. However, he had studied countless combinations over the past few days and finally combined the light of destruction, so he had a deep understanding of the pure essence of destruction. At this moment, as soon as he came into contact with the breath, he instantly discovered the essence of destruction within it, and he vaguely sensed the giant's essence from the essence of destruction. The breath was not purely a certain kind of power, but a combination of thousands of powers. The combination was vaguely similar to his light of destruction, and they were both destruction that was close to the source. It was just that the focus was different. Among them, Luo Fan's light of destruction was extremely pure and did not contain any impurities. On the other hand, the breath focused on destruction that was burning. Both of them were equally powerful. In fact, the destruction contained in the breath was even more powerful due to its burning characteristics and could cause a stronger effect. In the face of such a breath, Luo Fan was delighted to see it and suddenly extended his hand to study the characteristics of this breath. His light of destruction and the breath of destruction were only focused on different aspects. In essence, there was no difference between them. It was just that his light of destruction was more in line with his personality and ideas. That was why he had chosen it this way. Although the burning effect contained in the breath was not inferior to the light of destruction in terms of purity, it was not superior either. It was also the giant's choice, If the breath was cultivated by the giant, it would naturally be his choice. If he was born with it, then it was the choice of the forbidden area's rocky sky, or rather, its emphasis. It was precisely because there was no obvious difference between the two that if Luo Fan could carefully study the profoundness of the breath, he would definitely be able to obtain great benefits. Putting everything else aside, just the combination of the burning effect would save him a lot of trouble in studying the pure light of destruction or fire of destruction. With this thought in mind, he did not hesitate, nor did he have the mood to refute the giant's words. He raised his hand and turned it, and a wisp of the light of destruction separated. It turned into a spherical cover and suddenly spun, wrapping around a small wisp of the breath. The light of destruction was similar in nature to the breath, and they were on the same level, but not completely the same. However, it was the existence that could produce the greatest effect on the breath. It was precisely because of this that the light of destruction was able to cut the breath so easily. After all, the giant's control over the breath had not reached the acme of perfection. His body was so huge that this breath was just a mouthful for him, but for Luo Fan, it was earth-shattering. The wisp of breath that Luo Fan wrapped around was only a small wisp to Luo Fan. To the giant, it was so insignificant that it surpassed the limits of his perception. Therefore, he did not notice Luo Fan's actions at all. After doing all that, Luo Fan turned the light of destruction around him into another form. He suddenly spun and drilled down along the power of the breath. Along the way, he destroyed the laws of destruction at a speed faster than the breath, and his figure instantly left the range of the two palms. After leaving the range, he turned the light of destruction again, and his figure had already gone around a mysterious path, bypassing the breath, and directly pounced towards the giant face that was tens of millions of feet away. The giant's eyes were filled with shock. He turned his head, and the breath circled in the void. He went around an extremely agile path and directly blocked in front of Luo Fan from the bottom. Only then did Luo Fan completely see the giant. The destroyer's perspective gave him senses that surpassed all Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators, allowing him to instantly see the essence of this creature. Although this creature was so huge, its core was only inside its head, and it was an existence that was about the size of a fist. This existence was extremely mysterious. It was the product of countless laws of destruction. These laws and laws contained the essence of the rocky sky, and it could be said that it was the source of the rocky sky. If one looked at it from the perspective of power, it would be a strange power, the power of the rocky sky. This existence was compatible with every part of this creature. It was the source of every part of this creature that could move, and it was also the foundation of this creature. At the same time, this existence was incomparably closely connected to the rocky sky. It was as if the laws of the entire rocky sky resonated with it, that could not be cut off or eliminated. If this existence existed, the entire rocky sky would exist. If this existence was destroyed, the entire rocky sky would be destroyed. As expected, the rocky sky's core is within its body. The resistance of this forbidden land is completely compatible with its will as well. A thought suddenly flashed through Luo Fan's mind. The power around this creature was incomparably ferocious. It was more than 10,000 times stronger than the power he possessed. The reason why it was so much stronger than the creature in the void was naturally because its body was many times larger than the creature in the void. With a larger body, the amount of energy it could contain would naturally be greater. Naturally, more of the Forbidden Land's resistance would be able to be gathered in its body. This creature's realm had already surpassed Khanate Grand Luo realm. It had also not reached the Perishment realm, but it was only a tiny bit away. At this moment, this tiny bit of difference was overcome by the creature's uncontrollable grief and anger. This giant was clearly an extremely emotional creature. Even with its high realm, it could not completely avoid the influence of its emotions on its strength. The emotions of grief and anger clearly had a positive effect on it. In other words, the creature's realm could be said to be equivalent to the perishment realm at this moment. While it was still much weaker than Luo Fan, there was no qualitative difference. Under the situation where there was no qualitative difference, a difference of tens of thousands of times in power was clearly not so easy to overcome. Under such circumstances, a difference of tens of thousands of times was enough to crush everything. In other words, if Luo Fan could only unleash the power of his own power, it would be impossible for him to stop this creature. It would be impossible for him to wipe out this creature's life and destroy the rocky sky. Fortunately, Luo Fan had already figured out the wrong path he had stepped onto and found a way to unleash the power he possessed. His expression did not change in the face of the incredibly powerful breath. With a flip of his hand, the light of destruction condensed into a ball of light in the void. The ball of light was extremely mysterious. It seemed real and illusory, as if it did not exist at all. However, it gave off an extremely tangible aura. It was enough to make all living beings feel that the ball of light was even more real and tangible than themselves when they saw it. For the latest chapter, please log in. Chapter 877. The ball of light had a peculiar form. It seemed like an extremely complicated rune, yet it also seemed like an exquisite three-dimensional talisman. It also seemed like an indescribably mysterious trace of the Great Path. This was the form that could best unleash the power of the light of destruction. It was a supreme form that was compatible with the Great Path of the universe on Earth. The light of destruction was formed by the combination of many powers in a special way. It contained the extremely pure essence of destruction, and it already possessed unbelievable might. However, it was only a ray of light after all, and it still had a weakness. If it existed purely in the form of light, it would not be able to unleash its power to its limit. It was just like how pure steel was unable to unleash super destructive power. Steel had to be processed and transformed into weapons in order to unleash super destructive power that could kill and exterminate living beings. The form that the light formed was a process of processing steel into weapons. After such a change, the power of the light of destruction was extremely condensed, and the destructive power that it could unleash was more than 100 times stronger than before. Such a powerful power directly activated Luo Fan's aura, causing his indomitable aura to skyrocket by several times. In an instant, he seemed even taller than the giant. The giant's agile breath blotted out the sky and blocked in front of Luo Fan. Although the amount was incomparably huge and the condensation of the breath itself was quite astonishing, it was only at the level of Luo Fan's light of destruction. Compared to the mysterious form that the light of destruction had obtained, it had no ability to resist at all. In an instant, the strange form that the light of destruction had formed collided with the breath that contained the essence of destruction. An extremely powerful shock wave was produced from the point of collision, and it started spreading in all directions from the point of contact. The shock wave was so powerful that it directly shattered the surrounding laws, the void, and even the surrounding time. Such an impact. It was not only limited to the space-time that Luo Fan was in, but it also spread out, directly affecting the space-time that Luo Fan had entered when he had just entered this checkpoint. There were only clouds in that strange space-time, but even the void had materialized. Under these fluctuations, space and time violently shook. The laws became extremely turbulent. Even the huge network became extremely chaotic during this process. To the cloud-like living beings that the giant called people, this chaos existed in this space and time. The impact was unimaginable. In an instant, all the clouds began to tremble violently. A sense of panic was transmitted from the clouds, constantly reverberating through the entire space-time. It constantly surged, causing the originally silent space-time to seem like a market. Although the waves of panic emitted by these clouds were vague, there were still a lot of them. Originally, only exterminators like Luo Fan could barely sense it, but now any Khanate cultivator could sense it. When they sensed this fluctuation of terror, all the Khanate golden immortals instantly understood that it was already the final moment before this rocky sky was destroyed. In an instant, Luo Fan's image appeared in everyone's minds. It had only been a few days since they had entered this checkpoint. To be able to find the key in such a short period of time and incite such panic in the entire rocky sky, they could not think of anyone else who could do it other than the unfathomable Luo Fan, who was many times stronger than all of them. For a moment, everyone's emotions became rather complicated. Fortunately, they were innate grand heavenly realm cultivators after all, and they still possessed relatively firm willpower. After coming to his senses, he tried his best to sense the changes in his surroundings. Very soon, they discovered the source of the terrifying shockwave produced by the collision between Luo Fan and the giant. Each of them used their own extraordinary abilities to rush over. Although the rocky sky was vast and boundless, Khanate Grand Luo cultivators only needed to know their destination. Reaching the destination was no longer a problem. In next to no time, a few Khanate Grand Heavenly Realm cultivators that were comparatively closer arrived at the location of the battle between Luo Fan and the giant, and they saw the scene that seemed like a battle between the gods of creation. Even though those Khanate Grand Heavenly Realm cultivators had rushed over at their fastest speed, it still took them a few minutes to arrive here. On the other hand, a few minutes of time was sufficient for Luo Fan and the giant to exchange a myriad of attacks. Thus, after a few minutes, the battle between Luo Fan and the giant had entered a climax, and the aftershock of their battle caused the two spaces to become extremely chaotic. No matter if it was the space where the Khanate Grand Heavenly Realm cultivators resided or the space where the giant resided, the laws and laws had been thrown into chaos by the battle. Amidst this chaos, the barriers between the two spaces that were originally completely separated were faintly discernible, and they became intermittent. In other words, there were some places where the barriers still existed, yet some places had vanished completely. The two spaces were still separated at some places, yet they'd merged into one at some places, and there was no difference between them any longer. Under such circumstances, the intense battle between the two of them that covered an area of 1 trillion kilometers seemed like they'd suddenly appeared and vanished in the eyes of the Khanate Grand Heavenly Realm cultivators. On the other hand, every single battle created an extremely terrifying aftershock that caused the laws and laws to become even more chaotic, causing the form of existence of the barriers between the two spaces to undergo even greater changes. Thus, it caused the efforts of the numerous Khanate Grand Heavenly Realm cultivators that were instinctively analyzing the pattern of the changes to come to naught. They were utterly unable to find the pattern of the changes, so they were naturally unable to interfere in the battle between the two of them. Not to mention that the battle between Luo Fan and the giant had completely surpassed the Khanate Grand Heavenly Realm, and it was even to the extent that it could be considered as a peak battle amongst Perishment Realm experts. The giant's strength was boundless, and his own strength was vast and vast. Every single attack he executed might be thousands or even tens of thousands of times stronger than all the strength that Luo Fan possessed. On the other hand, Luo Fan's strength was indescribably exquisite in the application of his strength. He was able to bring forth his comparatively weak strength to its limits, and he was able to easily find the giant's flaws. He avoided the giant's attacks and went around the vast energy to directly attack the giant's body. Because the two of them had different advantages, the battle between the two of them was extremely intense. Neither of them could defeat the other in a short period of time. Of course, overall, Luo Fan had the upper hand, and the giant was exhausted from dealing with him. The reason was very simple. During this process, Luo Fan gained more and more understanding of the light of annihilation. His development of the power of the light of annihilation became deeper and deeper, and he found more and more combinations of the light of annihilation. The final result was that the strength he could display was getting stronger and stronger. On the other hand, the giant was only equivalent to a Perishment Realm expert under the stimulation of grief and rage. his strength would only weaken along with his grief and rage, and it was impossible for his strength to increase. As a result, Luo Fan was naturally gaining the upper hand. The giant's intelligence was definitely not weak, and it could even be said to be much greater than Khanate Grand Heavenly Realm experts. This was an obvious fact that the giant was able to discern even amidst his grief and rage. Therefore, the more the battle went on, the more anxious he felt, and this anxiety caused his movements to become more and more obvious. His movements were filled with flaws that shouldn't have been there in the first place. Conversely, this allowed Luo Fan to gain the upper hand more easily, causing the giant to become even more anxious. And so on and so forth. It had actually formed a vicious cycle. When all the first Heaven Immortal Realm cultivators arrived here, it was already a few hours later. The giant was already completely suppressed by Luo Fan, and it was only barely able to maintain its life to avoid being reaped by Luo Fan. Moreover, it didn't have the slightest ability to counterattack, and it was like a chicken waiting to be slaughtered. At this moment, Luo Fan did not relax. Instead, his expression grew even more solemn. The closer it was to a time like this, the more vigilant and careful one had to be. If a Khanate Grand Luo were to go all out, regardless of the consequences, he wanted to take his opponent down with him. If an exterminator was not careful, he could very well be dragged to the grave with him. Not to mention that the giant before him wasn't just at the innate golden immortal realm, and it seemed like he just barely stepped into the perish realm. On the other hand, Luo Fan himself had yet to break through to the void comprehending realm. He was still in the perishing realm. This giant's dying counterattack would completely erase him, and it would be almost effortless. Under such circumstances, how could Luo Fan dare to act carelessly? At this moment, the area where the two spaces overlapped had been transformed into a paste. The countless laws and laws, the boundless energy of energy, and the energy of rock that caused this entire space to become a rocky sky were completely mixed together with the paste, causing that area to become extremely chaotic. It was to the point that any Khanate Golden Immortal Realm cultivator would have to utilize their entire strength in order to barely survive within it. In such a state, it was impossible for the rock life forms that existed in the other space to continue existing. They'd been completely annihilated a long time ago. Such a fact was naturally not a secret to the giant. The giant was originally furious because Luo Fan had directly annihilated his people, the cloud-like life forms, causing them to lose the possibility of revival. The fact that the rock life forms had been completely annihilated during this period of time was obvious. Coupled with the fact that a part of the rock life forms had been annihilated because of him, it made him feel even more remorseful. Emotions of self-destruction gradually took over his heart. As mentioned before, even though the rock giant was an existence equivalent to the perishing realm, he was still extremely emotional. He still could not control all his emotions like cultivators. Instead, the fluctuations of his emotions would cause his forces to fluctuate greatly as well. As a result, such self-destructive emotions caused his power to go berserk. As his power increased greatly, the damage it caused to his body became greater as well. Moreover, the openings created when he used his power became more and more obvious. This made it easier for Luo Fan instead. It's almost here. At a certain moment, Luo Fan's mind suddenly gave birth to such a realization. When he came to this realization, with a thought, the light of destruction changed in a way that it had never shown before. The strange pattern formed by the light of destruction trembled, changed, and suddenly wrapped around his body. When it wrapped around his body, the pattern became more than 10 times more complicated. The entire pattern instantly released an aura of the Great Tao, as if the Great Tao had suddenly manifested. Evidently, this change caused the light of destruction to become embedded in the Great Tao, or rather, it had formed an extremely deep resonance with the Great Tao. As a result, it had fused with the Great Tao to a certain extent. Following this change, Luo Fan's figure completely melted into nothingness. His entire person had disappeared without a trace, leaving only the light of annihilation, which was getting fainter and fainter, constantly undergoing millions of changes. In the end, it gradually fused with the void and was about to disappear. At this moment, the giant finally let out a roar of despair. The huge body suddenly collapsed, as if it had undergone a nuclear transformation, erupting with power that was tens of thousands of times more powerful than before. After this power appeared, it did not directly charge towards Luo Fan. Instead, it frantically gathered towards the mysterious, strange existence that originally existed in the giant's body. The strange existence that Luo Fan confirmed was the core of the rocky sky. This power was endless, enough to destroy the world, create all things, open the void, and recreate the universe. However, it was extremely easy to completely fuse with the small, strange existence. At the moment when the power completely surged into it, an extremely strong resentment was directed at Luo Fan. The power that had been compressed by an unknown number of times by that strange existence directly broke through the void. It followed the resentment to where Luo Fan was, and directly poured into the strange pattern formed by the light of destruction. As a result, the light of destruction collapsed and shattered into countless tiny forces. These small forces had completely lost their nature. Having lost their nature, it was as if their origin had completely collapsed, or rather, they had been killed. When the light of destruction collapsed, the resentment did not disappear. Instead, it became even more intense. With a turn, it rushed towards the entire void of the rocky sky, completely annihilating the increasing number of laws, causing the entire void to gradually collapse. The reason for this was that at this moment, Luo Fan had already entered the Great Path through the resonance between the light of destruction and the Great Path. Or rather, he was in a state that was extremely similar to the Great Path in the unseen world. In such a mysterious state, there was no physical body in reality, and it was impossible to find its location. The light of destruction seemed to have wrapped around him, but in fact, it had little to do with him. It was destroyed. For Luo Fan, it did not affect him much. At most, he had lost a lot of the power that formed the light of destruction, and he had unknowingly replenished that power during the several hours of battle. The light of destruction was not lost, and he could no longer take it back into his body. From his point of view, it could not be considered a loss. The resentment was the giant's extreme resentment towards Luo Fan for destroying all his people and his entire home. It had completely locked on a Luo Fan's life origin. As long as Luo Fan did not die, he would never disappear. Therefore, after destroying everything where Luo Fan originally stood, because it could still sense the existence of Luo Fan's life origin, it did not disperse. Instead, because Luo Fan was hidden in the unseen world, it could not attack him directly, so it became even more intense. It was precisely because Luo Fan was hidden in the unseen world that it could not find him at all. Therefore, it could only cover the heavens and the earth and destroy everything in its way, in order to destroy Luo Fan through this process. Such an action did not affect Luo Fan much. However, to the many Khanate Grand Luo cultivators who were originally observing the battle between the gods of creation from afar, it was practically a disaster. Even though the resentment was targeted at Luo Fan and not these Khanate Grand Luo cultivators, it was an attack that covered the heavens and the earth after all. After all, it was an attack that covered the heavens and the earth and enveloped everything. Even if it wasn't targeted at them, they were still affected by the strong aftershock. On the other hand, because the giant had treated his entire body as a sacrifice, the strength of his strength had arrived at an inconceivable state. His cultivation realm had arrived at the peak of the perish realm, and his strength far exceeded the void comprehension realm. Even the slightest aftershock from such a force wasn't something that Khanate Grand Luo cultivators could endure. For a time, numerous Khanate Grand Luo cultivators instantly collapsed, and practically every single one of them was instantly shattered into pieces. Fortunately, They'd prepared their defenses a long time ago when facing such a battle. At the critical moment, they'd completely abandoned all worries and aroused all the potential in their bodies. After practically all of them paid the price of the destruction of their perfected realm magic treasures, they were finally able to protect their quintessence, and they were barely able to limit the damage to their bodies, allowing them to barely suffer any damage to their foundations. At this moment, Luo Fan had finally seized an opportunity. He took a light step out from the darkness and directly arrived before the strange existence that was left behind after the giant was completely destroyed. He raised his hand and clenched it. When Luo Fan took a step out from the darkness, the resentment that was left behind by the giant instantly noticed his existence, and it directly converged towards him while carrying boundless energy with the intention of directly obliterating him. However, Luo Fan's actions practically surpassed the speed of time. The energy within his body circulated, and boundless light of destruction blasted into the strange existence from the inside out. In an instant, the strange existence was completely destroyed. Along with the destruction of the strange existence, the entire rocky sky was destroyed along with it, and the changes that had occurred a few thousand times in the past appeared once more. The entire rocky sky started to collapse, starting from where Luo Fan stood. It was like a ball of mist that grew and expanded without end, and it instantly swept through the entire rocky sky that covered an area of countless light years. Chapter 878. Time flowed by slowly, and another 300 years had passed without him realizing it. At this moment, Luo Fan's doppelganger, which cultivated the path of strength, had already arrived at the 6,666 checkpoint of the 9,999 checkpoints on the Bridge of Times. At that time, after they passed through the barrier of the rock projection in the sky 300 years ago, besides Luo Fan, who obtained great gains, all the other Golden Immortal Realm cultivators had suffered a great deal of injuries. Their bodies were shattered into pieces, and the most troublesome part was that their respective perfection stage magic treasures had been destroyed by the counterattack of the Titan before its death. The power that a great perfection-grade magic treasure could unleash might not necessarily surpass that of a great perfection-grade magic treasure, but it would definitely be more powerful than the divine abilities that they could unleash themselves. Losing their perfection stage magic treasures had an extremely huge impact on the strength of these Golden Immortal Realm cultivators. On the other hand, the difficulty of refining a perfection stage magic treasure was unimaginably great, and it practically required 10,000 years of time to complete the refinement. Thus, during these 300 years, all the Golden Immortal Realm cultivators could only enter the battlefield empty-handed, and they were unable to replenish their perfection stage magic treasures. Because of this, the worries Luo Fan had when he saw the rock projection in the sky had become a reality. During the next few thousand barriers, the other Golden Immortal Realm cultivators were unable to be of any use at all. Even if they were able to find the critical core of some barriers by chance, they could only send a message to Luo Fan and ask Luo Fan to make a move. During these 300 years, Luo Fan had experienced over 3,000 barriers, and he'd experienced over 3,000 battles before he arrived at the 6,666 barrier. Moreover, every single battle was a battle between experts at the Annihilation Realm. Practically every single opponent he encountered could absolutely crush him in terms of strength, and it was only their cultivations that were inferior to him. Under such circumstances, the difficulty of every single battle was obvious. During these 3,000-plus battles, Luo Fan had been injured over 2,000 times. It was even to the extent that he'd suffered injuries that were practically impossible to recover from for a few tens of times. There were even a few times where he'd spent a few years before he was barely able to recover. To Luo Fan, such an encounter was naturally not something to be pleased about. Of course, these battles were beneficial to him. His cultivation had unknowingly risen to the peak of the 9th stage of the Celestial Realm. What he gained from each battle, the origin of the projections of the Forbidden Lands, allowed him to walk even further in the Annihilation Realm. At this moment, he was already faintly at the edge of the emptiness realm. In terms of time spent on the Bridge of Eras, Luo Fan's rate of cultivation was so fast that it would make any cultivator envious. However, if one were to look at this time from the perspective of Earth's universe, these 300 years were equivalent to 3 million years. It was not surprising that he had made such progress after such a long period of time. The 6,666 checkpoint on the Bridge of Times happened to be two-thirds of the 9,999 checkpoints. Judging from the 3,333rd checkpoint, this checkpoint would definitely be extraordinary. When Luo Fan and the other Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators stepped into this level, they heard the treasure spirit of the Bridge of Eras say, "This is the 6,666th level. The 5 elements perilous grounds. The method to pass this level is to destroy this place." As soon as it finished speaking, it instantly appeared in everyone's minds. Luo Fan raised his eyes and glanced around. The space here was extremely strange. It seemed to be divided into 5 areas, and each area was different. The area they were in was filled with boundless liquid. The liquid filled heaven and earth and filled the void. It seemed like the entire universe was covered by the liquid. There were 4 other areas in the distance. Some were filled with flames, some were supported by countless ancient trees, some were boundless land, and some were filled with boundless golden light. They faintly conformed to the 5 elements, as expected of the 5 elements' perilous grounds. Apart from Luo Fan, who had improved greatly, the other Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators did not gain nothing during these 300 years. Although they had lost their Dharma treasures at the Great Perfection Realm, and their divine abilities were much weaker than before, they had experienced thousands of battles after all. Although they were too weak to participate in the battles, they still had experience. Naturally, they could obtain many benefits from it. At this moment, almost every Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivator had more or less improved compared to before. In fact, the martial monarch had relied on his experience to push his cultivation to the peak of the 8th level of the immortal realm. The divine abilities he could exert had even surpassed the Khanate Grand Luo Realm. Although there was still a huge gap between him and the Exterminator, he had an overwhelming advantage over the other Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators. Besides the martial monarch, the one who improved the most amongst the Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators was none other than the Sky Maiden. Because of the battle with Luo Fan, the Sky Maiden had gained a deeper understanding of the source of her unique abilities, and she had more thoughts about the techniques she cultivated. Coupled with the fact that she had witnessed so many high-end battles during these 300 years, her comprehension of the heaven and earth, the Grand Tao, the laws, and all sorts of energy had become countless times stronger than before. Because of this improvement, her cultivation naturally rose along with the tide. At this moment, her cultivation had already reached the peak of the 8th level of the immortal realm. Although the strength she could exert wasn't much higher than her cultivation, she could be considered as a top-notch existence amongst the Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators, and there were only a few who could defeat her. With such improvement, even though they were unable to participate in the final battle during the process of passing through the levels, they weren't as useless as before. Instead, they had formed a rather fixed division of labor, and after they found out about the characteristics of this level, they didn't have to discuss too much before they knew what they had to do. This sort of change was much more efficient than when they set out on their own and competed with each other all those years ago. This was the reason why they were able to make such a change after they'd completely lost all thoughts of competing with Luo Fan. It was precisely because they'd completely lost all hope of defeating Luo Fan that they were willing to play supporting roles and assist Luo Fan. Otherwise, as proud and arrogant Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators, how could they be willing to play supporting roles like this? Give up on the opportunity to obtain the greatest benefit? Luo Fan naturally noticed their hard work, and it was even to the extent that he rather encouraged them. Sometimes he would give them some benefits as well, and it allowed them to obtain the quintessence energy that they obtained after passing through the levels. However, Even though all the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators had thought of countless methods to endure the assimilation of the quintessence energy that descended, they were unable to resist it by relying on their own strength after all. The quintessence energy they were able to endure was extremely limited. It was even to the extent that even the martial monarch was unable to completely obtain the quintessence energy of a restricted area, let alone the others. It was precisely because of the limitations of their respective strengths that the benefits of these 3,000-plus levels were practically completely absorbed by Luo Fan. The others weren't able to obtain much at all. This level isn't simple. Fellow Taoists, be careful. Luo Fan sensed the changes in the 5 areas in the 5 directions, and he spoke with a solemn expression. May I know what's so profound about this place? The martial monarch couldn't help but frown when he heard Luo Fan's words, and he asked, "This place is divided into 5 areas that correspond to the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. For example, the place we're at right now. It's the water area. Everything in this area belongs to the water element, and it's already leaned towards the extreme. Instead, the 5 elements of water were born from it, and it formed a complete cycle of the heavens and the earth and gave birth to countless living beings of the water element. If my senses aren't wrong, then there's at least a living being that has surpassed the perfected stage in the water area." Luo Fan spoke about the information he'd sensed earlier without holding back at all. At this moment, Luo Fan had already touched the threshold of the void comprehension realm, and his senses were so strong that they had arrived at an unimaginable state. Under such circumstances, even though he had only taken a glance at it, it was impossible for him to do so. However, the information he obtained was already something that an ordinary golden immortal realm cultivator wouldn't be able to obtain even after spending 1,000 years. To be able to directly delve into the essence of the 5 elements impasse and describe the various characteristics of this place was a matter of course. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the expressions of the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivators changed slightly. This water element region already had a creature that surpassed the level of perfection. What about the other regions? For the 5 elemental danger grounds to exist in balance, it was clear that the difference in power between each region was not too great. If there was something in the water element region, there should be something in other regions as well. In other words, there were at least 5 beings that surpassed the great perfection stage in the entire 5 elements impasse. Among them, any living being that surpassed the great perfection realm could easily crush all the innate grand Luo realm cultivators present, except for Luo Fan. Even a martial monarch could exert strength that surpassed the great perfection realm. But because he was still an innate grand Luo realm cultivator, it would be difficult for him to fight against the living beings that surpassed the great perfection realm who lived in this forbidden area with endless power. The situation was so bad. It was the best among the thousands of checkpoints they had gone through. Among the thousands of checkpoints they had gone through, the most dangerous one was the 2 beings that surpassed the level of Grand Luo cultivators who went against them. At this moment, there were 5 of them. This had completely exceeded the limit they could endure. For a time, they looked at each other with extremely unsightly expressions. Wait, there seems to be something else. Luo Fan suddenly frowned and said. His words caused the hearts of the Khanate Grand Luo cultivators to skip a beat. Is there something more dangerous? The martial monarch cried out in surprise. I don't know if it's more dangerous or something else, but the beings that surpassed the level of perfection didn't seem to have fused with the core of the 5 elements impasse. They seemed to be purely beings that surpassed the level of perfection. Luo Fan's expression was still solemn as he said. His words caused the expressions of the Khanate Grand Luo cultivators to change drastically. If they did not fuse with the core of the forbidden grounds, it meant that the beings did not receive the blessing of the entire forbidden grounds. They did not possess endless power, and the might of their divine abilities was only equivalent to cultivators that surpassed the level of perfection. Such cultivators posed no threat to Luo Fan at all, and he could destroy them with a wave of his hand. From this aspect, it was a good thing. However, Even the 5 beings that surpassed the level of perfection did not have the qualifications to receive the blessing of the entire Forbidden Grounds, and they did not have the qualifications to accommodate the core of the 5 elements impasse. Unless the 5 elements impasse returned to the 3,334th checkpoint, or there was a being that was even more powerful than the 5 beings that surpassed the level of perfection that took over the core. Otherwise, it would definitely be inexcusable. How could the 6,666th checkpoint return to the difficulty of the 3,334th checkpoint? No matter how they looked at it, there was only the second possibility. There was a being that was even more powerful than the 5 beings. Only then would it make sense. From this aspect, the situation was even more dangerous and troublesome than what they had imagined. Since the Kane Grand Luo cultivators were able to cultivate to such a level, they were naturally not fools. How could they not have thought of such a fact? It was exactly because of this that their expressions changed drastically. It's difficult to explain the exact situation right now. Why don't we investigate it like we did before? The martial monarch's expression changed for a long time before he spoke. Strength represented the right to speak. The martial monarch's strength had grown to a level that was only inferior to Luo Fan, so his right to speak had unknowingly risen to a level that was inferior to Luo Fan. Therefore, the martial monarch had suddenly obtained the position of leader amongst the group of over 20 people, and he possessed the authority to command them. Luo Fan did not place his hopes on them, so he just nodded and said, "All right, the difficulty of this test isn't low, so be careful." Everyone listened to Luo Fan. After saying their goodbyes, they went off in groups in an orderly fashion. Even a martial monarch did not stay on the spot. He left this place as well and headed toward a certain direction. In the blink of an eye, only Luo Fan remained here. Luo Fan floated in the liquid. He did not move immediately, but he carefully sensed the situation in the entire place. Even though he could faintly sense the location of the strongest being that surpassed the perfected stage in the water element region, he did not come here to fight it. However, he hadn't come here to fight it. Instead, he had come to find the core of the 5 elements impasse and destroy it. Since the being that surpassed the great perfection realm hadn't fused with the core, naturally, there was no need for him to head there immediately to look for that being. During these 300 years, not only had Luo Fan's cultivation and realm improved, but other aspects had improved tremendously as well. It was as if the method to perfectly unleash the might of one's power was no longer limited to the light of destruction. Instead, it was thousands of times more abundant. He had already created thousands of methods or abilities that were similar to the light of destruction. Each of these abilities could unleash a certain characteristic to the extreme. When activated by his perishment stage cultivation, each of them could unleash power that was close to the void comprehending stage. He was able to experience thousands of perishment stage battles over the years without being defeated. One of the most important reasons was that he possessed thousands of abilities that could unleash the full might of his power. At this moment, he wanted to delve deeper into the secrets of the place, and there were also suitable abilities for him to use. Floating in the boundless liquid, he lifted his hand and pointed. An invisible ripple spread out from his finger, spreading out in all directions at a speed that surpassed time. The ripple was extremely profound. It was formless and intangible, but it seemed to have existed since ancient times and would continue to exist forever. It completely broke through the original limits of the ripple, as if it had turned into something that would never change. This was a wondrous power combination that Luo Fan had created by combining his analytical abilities and hundreds of other mysterious powers. This combination was similar to the light of destruction. It did not exist in the form of an ordinary power, but in the form of a ripple. Luo Fan named this ripple the analytical ripple. When the analytical ripple began to spread, endless information was transmitted into his mind through some mysterious connection. This information was none other than the 5 elemental impasse, or rather, the various mysteries of this water elemental region. This included what the liquid that filled the water element area was, what kind of essence it had, why it existed in such a form, what it was composed of, what other forms of existence existed in addition to such a way of existence, what kind of creatures existed in it. Just like this, it was complicated and messy, but it was not the slightest bit confusing, allowing Luo Fan to easily distinguish between the primary and secondary. This was the effect of the analytical ripple. Through the transmission of countless information, Luo Fan's understanding of the water region became deeper and deeper. He also understood why the rules of this region were formed like this and what kind of effect it had. Although the analytical ripple was amazing, it was impossible to have no limits after all. Therefore, after exploring for tens of thousands of light years and barely reaching the edge of this attribute region, the analytical ripple no longer had the strength to spread and retracted at the same speed. In the blink of an eye, it had already condensed on Luo Fan's fingertips. It was like an invisible halo, stretching and contracting at a frequency similar to a heart. The void was stirred by this fluctuation, causing ripples to spread out circle after circle. It looked extremely mysterious. I still have to go through all 5 regions. Luo Fan secretly comprehended the information obtained through the analytical ripple and thought so. He lifted his foot and took a light step forward. An invisible wave flashed, and his figure had crossed tens of thousands of light years in an instant, arriving at the edge of the water region. Chapter 879. When he arrived at the edge, what lay before Luo Fan was boundless flames. The flames were colorful and radiated boundless heat. In the outside world, such flames could even scorch the void and burn the laws and laws into a ball. However, in this fiery world, such scorching flames did not have any effect at all. It was as if these flames were just ordinary flames. Not to mention burning the laws and laws. Even the void didn't change because of these flames. Clearly, the laws and laws in the fire element region were vastly different from ordinary space-time. Their ability to endure flames far exceeded one's imagination. Faced with the flames, Luo Fan did not hesitate. He lifted his foot and stepped into it. The endless flames around him licked at his body, but they had no effect on him, nor could they hurt him in the slightest. Even innate Zenith Heaven beings could adapt to almost all harsh environments, and there was nothing they could not do. Moreover, Luo Fan had already reached the void comprehending stage. His ability to adapt to the environment in the outside world was naturally stronger. Although the flames were shockingly powerful, he could adapt to them easily. Sensing the various powers of the flames around him, Luo Fan shook his right hand. The rippling analytic waves started spreading towards the entire fire element region. At the same time, boundless information was continuously transmitted into his mind, causing his understanding of the fire element region to increase at an unimaginable speed. As his understanding of this fire elemental region deepened, he became more and more relaxed and calm in the flames. The fire element region had also reached the peak of the fire attribute. Just like the water element region, the 5 elements of fire were derived, forming a complete cycle of the 5 elements of fire. It formed an incredibly perfect cycle of heaven and earth, giving birth to countless fire element beings. Among them, the most powerful being was also a being that had surpassed the great perfection stage. They were both beings that surpassed the level of perfection, but in terms of realms, they were no weaker than the perishment realm. It could definitely crush all innate Zenith Heaven cultivators. Before long, the analytic waves spread to their limits. They were instantly swept back. This meant that Luo Fan had already gained an understanding of the entire fire element area through the analytical wave, which was no less than that of the water element area. As his understanding deepened, Luo Fan could not help but frown slightly. He thought to himself, the core of the 5 elemental impasse isn't in this fire element region. With this understanding, he didn't stay in this area any longer, and with a single step, he used the fire element region's laws to shift through the void. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at the edge of the fire element region. In front of him was an ancient tree that grew out of nothingness and then disappeared into nothingness. Even the void was filled with a faint wood color. Even the laws and laws seemed to have been dyed with a kind of wood nature. This was clearly a wood element region. Luo Fan had gone through thousands of checkpoints and experienced more than 3,000 error projections. He had experienced more than 3,000 situations. So what kind of wonders had he not seen? Although the wood elemental region in front of him was magnificent and mysterious, there was nothing special about it to him. It could even be said that it was inferior to many of the scenes he had seen in the past. Naturally, he would not be surprised by such a scene, nor would he be touched by it. Similarly, he stepped into the region and released the analytic waves. In a short while, he had an extremely deep understanding of the wood element region. He could use the laws of the wood element region to easily shift through the void. However, similarly, he did not find the core of the five elemental impasse that he was looking for in this wood element region. When he understood that there was no core of the five elemental impasse here, Luo Fan had a realization. He knew that the core of the five elemental impasse should not exist in a certain region, but in another way. If he continued to explore like this, he might not find it even after walking through 5 regions. However, although he understood this, Luo Fan did not intend to stop the process of analysis and exploration. After all, to him, it would not take too much effort to analyze and explore an area, nor would it waste too much time. Even so, it did not matter if he could not find the core. Having a deep understanding of the five elemental impasse would always be beneficial to finding the core of the five elemental impasse. First of all, the most obvious thing was that this understanding could make it easier for him to exert the power of his own magic power, and he could not be shackled by the five elemental impasse. Therefore, after Luo Fan understood it, he did not stop. He directly shifted through the void based on his understanding of the wood element region and arrived at the edge of the wood element region. He then stepped into the next rocky sky, which was the earth element region. The same process did not need to be repeated. In a short while, his understanding of the earth element region had surpassed almost all the native creatures of the earth element region. In the end, there was no surprise. Luo Fan, who had expected this, did not stop. He lifted his foot and took another stride, easily crossing the void, and arrived at the edge of the earth element region. He stepped into the last, strange void that was filled with endless golden light, and even the vitality was like pieces of metal powder, which was the metal element region. After a few breaths, when the wave of analysis was retracted again, Luo Fan finally finished the entire exploration and analysis process of the five elemental impasse. At the same time, he also had an extremely deep understanding of the five elemental impasse, which even surpassed the understanding of any native creatures of the five elemental impasse. This was not an exaggeration. For Luo Fan, at this moment, his understanding of the five elemental impasse was not comparable to that of the native creatures of the five elemental impasse. The reason for this was very simple. Perhaps in a certain region, Luo Fan's understanding of that region was not as good as that of the native creatures of the region that surpassed the great perfection level. However, Luo Fan's understanding of other regions was by no means comparable to that of this creature. In summary, that creature's understanding of the five elemental impasse was naturally far less than that of Luo Fan. There is no core in every region. Could it be that there is a more powerful creature that hid this core? Luo Fan frowned and pondered. He could not find the core in every region. This was something that Luo Fan had never encountered in the thousands of previous checkpoints. In other checkpoints, even if there was another hidden space-time, even if the core was hidden, there would definitely be some traces. If he used the wave of analysis to explore and analyze, he would definitely find some clues. He had never used the wave of analysis to explore the entire forbidden area like this. He did not find any trace of abnormality. It was as if the forbidden area in front of him did not have a core. This was obviously impossible. Even if it was the complete Earth universe, even if it was the Primordial world, even if it was the Tianyuan Great World and the Jili Great World, there would definitely be a core that could be broken and completely destroyed. Although, whether it was the Earth universe or other perfect worlds and great worlds, to find and break its core was not something that could be done by creatures that had not achieved the primordial chaos realm and had not reached the sage realm. There must be a deeper secret. There must be a deeper secret hidden. In an instant, Luo Fan came to such a conclusion. With such a conclusion, Luo Fan did not hesitate. With a thought, he instantly locked on the creature that surpassed the great perfection level in this metal elemental area. His body shook, and he took a step forward. In an instant, he crossed a distance of tens of thousands of light years. He came directly to the place where the creature was. This metal elemental area was also the same as other areas. It had reached the extreme in the aspect of metal and completed the process of things going in the opposite direction. It gave birth to the 5 elements of metal, forming a complete cycle of heaven and earth and giving birth to all things. The place where the creature that surpassed the great perfection level was a place similar to a planet. The entire metal elemental area was in fact like a strange void of the universe. It was not completely a void filled with golden light, but there were many planets. And these planets were constructed from the 5 elements of metal. If they were born in this area from the beginning, they would not be able to discover anything unusual about the planet at all, of course. This was not the true void of the universe, after all. Therefore, these planets were all of the same type. They were all just planets. There were no so-called stars in the entire metal elemental area at all. It was the void of tens of thousands of light years that provided light and energy for these planets. It was the golden light that filled the entire metal elemental area, the planet that Luo Fan came to at this moment. It was the largest planet in the entire metal elemental area. Its size was tens of thousands of times larger than the sun. If one did not hover above the void and look down, and instead landed on the planet's surface, even an ordinary cultivator would not be able to notice that it was a planet. They would think that it was a flat land with a round sky and a square earth. Luo Fan hovered above the planet and looked down at it. His gaze locked onto the living being that was lying down at a certain spot on the planet with its eyes closed. During the process of inspecting the entire place, Luo Fan had long since learned where the 20 or so Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators had gone to. Daoist Skyfire had naturally gone to the fire elemental area, whereas the Martial Monarch had gone to the wood elemental area. The other Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators had gone to different places as well. Amongst them, there was a Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivator who had landed on this planet. That Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivator was a divine ability that leaned towards the metal elemental attribute. However, it was just a slight lean. The Golden Court Tao was a perfect Tao. It was not divided into the 5 elements, nor was it divided into the water, fire, metal, lightning, and so on. Strictly speaking, Golden Core Tao cultivators did not emphasize or lean towards the 5 elements, wind, lightning, and various other divine abilities. If they were willing, they could use and cultivate them without any obstacles. However, that was only a characteristic of the Golden Core Tao. Although the foundation of a Golden Core Tao cultivator's cultivation was balanced and perfect, a cultivator's personality and preferences were different. Naturally, the divine abilities that they cultivated would differ. For example, Daoist Skyfire loved fire. His divine abilities leaned towards the fire element. Even his name had been changed to Daoist Skyfire. It was the same for this Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivator who had landed on this planet. Because he loved metal, his divine abilities leaned towards the metal elemental attribute as well. This Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivator was called the Guardian Deity. His relationship with Luo Fan was average, but he was on good terms with the Martial Monarch. His cultivation was at the 8th rank of the Immortal Realm. Because he had cultivated the indestructible body of Vajra, the divine abilities he could unleash were not inferior to the peak of the 8th rank of the Immortal Realm. Although he was not the strongest among the Khanate Grand Luo Realm cultivators, he was not bad either. When Luo Fan arrived, Luo Fan did not conceal his aura. Thus, the guardian deity instantly noticed Luo Fan's presence. The speed at which he discovered him was even faster than the living being who had surpassed the perfected Grand Luo realm. So fellow Taoist Luo Fan wants to investigate this place. I won't disturb you then. The guardian deity sent a voice transmission to Luo Fan tactfully before turning into a streak of light. In the blink of an eye, he left this planet and headed towards another planet. Although Luo Fan had investigated and analyzed every single area of the five elements impasse earlier, he did not spend much time. In fact, he did not even spend a quarter of an hour. In fact, the guardian deity had just landed on this planet. He had not even started to investigate yet. However, when Luo Fan arrived, he knew that Luo Fan had definitely investigated more than him. He would only be a hindrance if he stayed here, and would not be of any help at all. Thus, he simply sent a voice transmission and left. Luo Fan only nodded slightly at the guardian deity's departure. He did not approve of it, nor did he stop him. To him, it did not matter whether the guardian deity was on this planet or not. He had come here to investigate this living being who had surpassed the perfected Grand Luo realm. It would be best if he could check its memories to see if there were any secrets about the five elements impasse that Luo Fan had not been able to find with the analytical wave previously. Although the living being who had surpassed the perfected Grand Luo Fan's realm was equivalent to the perishment realm, it did not have the support of the five elements impasse. Without the integration of the core, its power was nothing compared to Luo Fan's. It could not resist anything that Luo Fan did to it. Under such circumstances, even if the guardian deity was here, it would not disturb him. However, it was not wrong for the guardian deity to leave. Since he had already come here, there was nothing for him to do here. It was a good choice to leave and investigate elsewhere. Are you an outsider? At this moment, the living being who had surpassed the perfected Grand Luo Fan opened its eyes and fixed its gaze on Luo Fan, who was in the void. Its words were extremely strange, as if some kind of metal was rubbing against each other, but it was not ear-piercing. On the contrary, there was a special charm to it that made people who heard it feel like it was a kind of enjoyment. Luo Fan had not heard of this language before, but it did not affect his understanding of its meaning. That's right. I have something to ask you. I wonder if your excellency can answer me generously. Luo Fan smiled and said. The language that he used was also the same kind of metal rubbing against each other. He had explored the entire five elements impasse through the analytical wave. He had naturally mastered the language that was commonly used in the metal elemental region. It was only natural for him to be able to speak it. I didn't expect you to really be an outsider. It seems that the time that his lordship spoke of has finally arrived. The living being did not answer Luo Fan's question. Instead, it sighed and slowly stood up. This living being had a humanoid appearance, and its height was similar to that of an ordinary person. However, there was a faint metallic luster flickering all over its body, and there was a faint flash of cold light. It was as if this huge humanoid figure was completely formed by the accumulation of sharp blades. When Luo Fan heard the living being's words, he could not help but be slightly stunned. Then he frowned. This five elements impasse has just been projected here not long ago. Even if this living being has memories, they are the memories of the original owner of the projection and the real five elements impasse. In the real five elements impasse, there's no way that a living being would be able to predict that it would be projected here, let alone the existence of people like us. Unless it's a saint. With that thought in mind, Luo Fan was puzzled. He raised his guard to the limit. If there was a saint in the real impasse of five elements, then it would be almost impossible for Luo Fan to destroy the projection of the impasse of five elements, no matter how strong he was or how many connate Grand Luo realm cultivators joined in. The higher his cultivation realm, the more Luo Fan felt how powerful a saint was. Even if the projection could not project a saint here, as long as there was a trace of a saint, it was enough to make any cultivator who had not reached the saint realm or attained the origin of origin helpless. If there was no saint in the five elements impasse, it meant that his lordship that the living being spoke of had a deeper secret. Perhaps there was something wrong with the living being's memories. Regardless of which one it was not good news for Luo Fan. He needed to be vigilant of both. Since the time is up, let's begin. The living being that surpassed the perfected stage side. As it spoke, the entire planet began to shake violently. The living being's body gradually released a golden brilliance that became brighter, more solid, and more dazzling. Although the entire metal element region was filled with boundless golden light, the golden light was so faint that it was almost non-existent when compared to the golden brilliance that the living being released. The difference was like the difference between heaven and earth. As the golden brilliance that the living being released became stronger, the entire planet shook more and more violently. Chapter 880. At the same time, it was not just the power transformed from the countless living beings on the planet that surged into the creature's body through some mysterious channel. There was also the power of the planet itself. Amidst the mysterious tremors, the entire planet shrunk at an extremely fast speed. Although it was extremely fast, the planet itself was tens of thousands of times bigger than the sun. Even though it was shrinking rapidly, it looked relatively slow from a macroscopic perspective. Only those with extremely powerful eyesight would be able to see the shrinking process. As for Luo Fan, he was obviously someone with extremely powerful eyesight. It's actually refining the entire planet so easily. Judging from its decisiveness, it seems like the threat of our arrival is extremely great in its memories. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Everything in the metal elemental region was metal elemental, and the planets were no exception. They were also condensed from various types of metal elemental energy. Moreover, they were extremely condensed to the point of turning into matter. From this, it was clear just how vast the power contained within the planet was. Even for Luo Fan, in terms of power alone, he could not even compare to 1/10,000th of the power contained within the planet. Seeing that the creature was refining and absorbing the planet at an unimaginable speed, continuously turning the planet's power into its own and increasing its power at an unimaginable speed, Luo Fan did not dare to hesitate. With a thought, he lifted his hand and enveloped the creature. In an instant, a power combination formed from thousands of powers that he had researched over the years shot out from his palm. After the power left his body, it turned into an extremely huge net that blanketed the sky and the earth, enveloping the creature fiercely. The huge net was no ordinary item. Instead, it was an arrest net that unleashed the full potential of the arrest power. The thousands of powers that formed the arrest net could each unleash the might of the arrest power within it. The thousands of powers merged together and unleashed the power of the arrest power to its limits. The power of the entire arrest power was exerted to the limit. This kind of limit even made Luo Fan suspect that if a void-comprehending expert didn't use any magical power, they might also fall under it. Its might was so great. One could imagine. At that moment, Luo Fan was facing a being whose realm had barely reached Death Realm. Its power was about the same as his. Although it was increasing rapidly, it was too slow compared to his methods. Luo Fan could be said to be a lion using its full strength to hunt a rabbit. The net of arrest had an indescribable ability to capture, so it was naturally impossible for it to cover the target slowly and directly like an ordinary net. The way this giant net moved forward was extremely mysterious. Although it was not so fast that it surpassed the speed of time, the moment it appeared, it enveloped the opponent. However, it had a kind of lock-on ability. Once the target was identified, no matter how big the target was, no matter where the target hid, even if the target went to another space-time, it would be able to follow the target unyieldingly and not capture the target. He would never give up. That living being was equivalent to the Annihilation Realm. It naturally had an instinctive reaction to divine abilities and mystic arts that targeted it. He knew how powerful those divine abilities and spells were. However, he instantly knew that this huge net that was coming towards him was not something that could be easily dodged. Thus, he did not try to dodge. Instead, he activated the power of himself and the planet below him. Using his powerful will as support, he instantly activated this power through his body. The power that this creature originally possessed was equivalent to Luo Fan's. At this moment, after absorbing the power of the countless creatures on the entire planet, as well as a small portion of the planet's power, its power was already 100 times stronger than Luo Fan's. With the sudden eruption of a power that was 100 times greater than his own, one could well imagine how powerful it was. In an instant, the entire metal element region surged. The golden light that originally filled the entire region suddenly rippled violently. This ripple was extremely intense, causing the entire region to become extremely chaotic. In some places, the golden light condensed into a ball, forming something like a golden sun. In other places, the golden light left its original spot. Only a pitch-black void was left. Of course, this change did not cause the metal element region to become like a normal void in the universe. This was because the change was not stable. After the golden suns appeared for an instant, they suddenly exploded. They produced extremely powerful ripples that caused the golden light to undergo a new change. A golden sun formed in another place, causing the place that was originally filled with golden light, or rather, where the golden sun was, to turn into a pitch-black void. This change repeated hundreds of times before it gradually stabilized. These hundreds of cycles were extremely fast. The time it took for it to stabilize was extremely short. At that moment, the change caused by the living being's power stabilized, before Luo Fan's arrest net could come into contact with the living being. In total, it took less than a breath for it to stabilize. The endless power emitted by the living being did not disperse outside its body, nor did it condense into a ball. Instead, it formed a strange shape. It seemed like a towering mountain, but it also seemed like an extremely long and strange weapon. It emitted a dazzling golden light and contained a sharp aura. The laws, and even time and space in the metal element region were different from other places. It could withstand metal attribute power that was countless times greater than other places. However, there was also a limit. Normally, the laws, time, and space of the metal attribute power that was scattered over an unknown number of light years in the metal element region could naturally withstand it. However, when the originally scattered metal attribute power condensed in one place, such as the towering mountain outside, the living being's body that looked like a strange weapon, the pressure produced by the metal attribute power was no longer something that the laws, and space of the metal element region could withstand. In an instant, the endless laws around the tall mountain or strange weapon seemed to have been sliced by a sharp blade. They were cleanly broken inch by inch. As it shattered, the surrounding space and even time itself began to shatter. In an instant, countless spatial fragments that looked like they had been cut by a sharp blade suddenly appeared. They turned into paper shreds that filled the sky and continuously revolved around the tall mountain or strange blade. The tall mountain or sharp blade seemed to have instantly disappeared from the space-time. It seemed like it existed, but it also seemed like it did not exist. If it was any other cultivator, they might be confused by this situation and would not know what was going on. However, Luo Fan could tell at a glance that the metal attribute power had been condensed to the point that it had broken through a certain limit. It had even severed time, so it would sometimes be within this space-time and sometimes leave this space-time. Luo Fan had once deduced the nature of this metal attribute power when it had broken through a certain limit. However, he had never truly experimented with it. After all, he had countless methods to cut through space-time. Why would he use such a crude method? At this moment, when he saw the metal attribute power condense to such an extent and produce such an effect of cutting through space-time, Luo Fan realized that his previous considerations were somewhat off. Methods. There was no distinction between crude and refined methods. As long as it achieved the same effect, it was a good method. Just like at this moment, when the metal attribute power condensed to a certain limit, it produced such an effect of cutting through space-time. It seemed extremely crude and did not require any technique at all. However, compared to using exquisite methods to cut through space-time, this method was also extremely powerful and could also unleash unimaginable power. It was not inferior to using exquisite methods to cut through space-time. Just as Luo Fan was comprehending something, the giant net that Luo Fan sent out had already come into contact with a mountain formed by the metal attribute power. In an instant, the giant net suffered an unimaginable impact. The entire net shook violently, and the vibrations were so intense that it seemed as if the entire net was about to collapse. It almost made people wonder if the giant net would collapse in an instant and turn back into the power that formed the giant net. However, it was obvious that this was only a matter of suspicion. This giant net was an arresting net. It did not rely on brute force to win, and its power did not allow it to deal with a simple and crude collision. Thus, after a series of tremors, the giant net instantly disappeared without a trace. However, when he reappeared, he had used some unknown method to travel through time and space, directly arriving near the creature's body. It suddenly shrank, and in the blink of an eye, it had completely enveloped the creature. How could that creature have expected such a method? Although this creature's realm was equivalent to the perishing realm, it was born and raised in the place of 5 elements. Even if it had lived for billions of years and accumulated endless knowledge, creating countless methods to use its own power and the power of the place of 5 elements, it was still unable to do so. But compared to Luo Fan, who had countless inheritances, Luo Fan was not as powerful as Luo Fan. For cultivators who had lived for trillions of years, there was still a world of difference in knowledge and methods. Luo Fan's method, which was specially developed for the purpose of arresting, was definitely beyond the limits of this creature's imagination. It was far beyond her imagination, and she could not understand it all. How could it have known that it had already sealed off the surrounding space-time and cut off all the paths that could reach its body? Yet, the giant net was still able to pass through the layers of obstructions to reach its side and wrap itself around it. At that moment, it could not even activate its power to deal with it. Its body was subdued by Luo Fan without being able to resist at all. When it was enveloped by the giant net, the mountain formed by the boundless metal attribute power around it completely lost its control. It instantly collapsed and turned into endless metal attribute power that scattered in all directions. In an instant, an extremely intense change was stirred up in the entire metal element region. However, the change this time was not the same as before, where the metal attribute power condensed into a ball. Instead, it was like a hurricane that formed countless whirlpools. It even pushed many planets away from their original positions and caused many planets to collide together, producing an even greater explosion of metal attribute power. This caused the entire metal element region to become even more chaotic. Such a change was like a vicious cycle. The explosion of power caused the planets to collide, and the collision of the planets produced an even greater explosion of power, pushing even more planets to collide. In just a short while, the entire metal element region seemed to have turned into a pot of paste, becoming extremely chaotic. This chaos did not affect Luo Fan much, but it had a great impact on the Khanate Grand Heavenly Realm cultivators. For example, the guardian deity, who had avoided Luo Fan previously, was greatly affected. The guardian deity had cultivated the invincible Vajra body, and the toughness of his body had even reached the level of a peak Khanate Grand Heavenly Realm cultivator. However, that only allowed him to prevent his body from being injured in this boundless chaos. It could not allow him to move freely in this chaotic region, and he could only go with the flow in this region. At the same time, he was amazed at how shocking and powerful Luo Fan's methods were. Luo Fan naturally did not care about anything else at this moment. The planet below was captured by him because of that living being. The connection between the inside and outside had been cut off, and the process of channeling power into that living being's body had already stopped. However, that did not mean that the planet had stabilized. Instead, it was the opposite. The planet seemed to be even more turbulent. After all, The mountain had exploded here previously, and the boundless metal attribute power had also caused an intense explosion on this planet. Naturally, this planet was affected the most. Even though this planet was so huge that it would not collide with other planets due to the impact, it was impossible for it to not move at all. Therefore, this planet was currently being tossed around by the extremely chaotic metal attribute power. It was like a fallen leaf drifting on the surface of water. Luo Fan was an annihilator, and one that had already reached the threshold of the void comprehending realm. His body naturally emitted an extremely mysterious aura, which fixed the surrounding space-time. Although the entire metal element region was extremely chaotic, and metal attribute power was rampaging everywhere, everything within several meters of his body was peaceful. The golden light still looked the same as before, without any abnormalities. He hovered there, looking at the planet that was getting further and further away. He casually waved his hand, and the net of arrest wrapped around that living being and brought him away from the planet. In an instant, the living being was brought before him and landed within several meters of him, facing Luo Fan. Do you think you can control everything just like that? At this moment, the seemingly completely defeated living being suddenly said strangely. From the moment he saw this living being was calm and had a calm expression on his face. Even though he had been captured just now, and the entire metal element region had fallen into chaos as if the end of the world had arrived, his expression did not change at all. At this moment, Luo Fan was rather shocked that the living being could still say something like that. I wouldn't dare to say that I can control everything, but controlling you shouldn't be wrong. Although he was shocked, Luo Fan naturally would not admit defeat verbally. He only smiled and said, "Back then, my lord once said that you outsiders would bring about the destruction of our entire 5 elements world. That's why the rulers of our 5 regions came to an agreement. If any of us discover any outsiders, we'll activate the essence of our region and notify the others. That way, we'll combine the power of our 5 regions to exterminate the outsiders," the being explained calmly. At this moment, there was a kind of resolution in its eyes. It was the resolution of abandoning everything. It was the resolution of sacrificing everything it had and everything it controlled in order to achieve a certain noble goal. Luo Fan had seen this kind of resolution many times. In the thousands of trials he had gone through, there were many living beings who had reached the end of the trials that controlled the power of the forbidden area, and the core of the forbidden area had this kind of resolution. In fact, when he was still immortal in his previous life, he had seen this kind of resolution in history. It was a resolution of resisting invaders, a resolution of sacrificing oneself for a noble goal. Faced with this kind of resolution, Luo Fan would feel extremely strange every time. It was as if he was a great villain, a legendary demon that wanted to destroy the world. In reality, with his actions in these trials, he was indeed destroying the world of these projected living beings, and he was indeed acting like a demon. Just as the creature was speaking, 4 powerful forces suddenly appeared out of nowhere. These 4 forces were wood, water, fire, and earth of the 5 elements, with the exception of the metal element. These forces were all different. Some were extremely pure, some were extremely extensive, some were extremely large in quantity, and some were extremely subtle in nature. These 4 forces traversed through time and space as if they had descended from nothingness, directly pouring into the area within a radius of several tens of thousands of kilometers from where Luo Fan was. The moment these forces appeared, the body of the living being that had been bound by the net of arrest trembled, and its entire body exploded. Its body instantly collapsed and turned into a wave of extremely powerful metal energy, while its consciousness also collapsed and disappeared in that instant, turning into nothingness. Luo Fan's net of arrest was targeted at this creature. When the creature's body collapsed and its will disappeared, this creature was equivalent to no longer existing. It had completely lost its effectiveness, causing the power that the creature had transformed into to instantly dissipate. It instantly merged with the four powers that had traveled through an unknown amount of time and space from an unknown place. Seeing this change, Luo Fan frowned, and an inexplicable feeling rose in his heart. I didn't think that it would sacrifice itself so decisively. It's really admirable. He only had time to think about this. At this moment, the five forces had already merged together, instantly producing an indescribable change. It directly enveloped the void within a radius of several tens of thousands of kilometers around Luo Fan, completely separating this void from the outside world. It also formed a completely independent space-time, directly restricting Luo Fan within this space-time. Chapter 881. The space-time that was separated and wrapped around Luo Fan began to become more and more stable in an unimaginable way. The rules and dharma within the space-time also became tougher and more complete. In a trance, this space-time had become a complete world. This world was extremely stable. Even the vast thousand worlds, or even the perfect world, could not compare to this world in terms of stability. The entire world was filled with a grayish brilliance. It was as if nothing existed in this brilliance, yet it also seemed as if everything existed, wrapping everything in the universe within it. It was as if it was in a state of chaos. Time and space seemed to have no meaning in this dull gray light. Thus, the size of one's body and the length of time were meaningless in this world. In the face of such a change, Luo Fan's eyes flashed with understanding. This gray brilliance was naturally not a true state of chaos. Instead, it was a wonderful existence formed by a huge amount of extremely high-quality five elements power mixed together in an extremely mysterious way. In the eyes of many living beings, even in the eyes of Tao Master Five Element, the universe was composed of the five elements. As long as one could transform the five elements, one could obtain everything in the universe and create countless perfect worlds. From a certain point of view, this was not false. At this moment, the power of the five elements had fused together under such a theory, forming a wondrous state similar to the state of primal chaos. This state was naturally very different from the true state of chaos. After all, even though Tao Master Five Element had the five elements worldview, he had only dared to use the five elements to explain and form the state of chaos after expanding the scope of the five elements. At this moment, each of the five powers belonged to the five elements. Moreover, each of them was extremely powerful, displaying the characteristics of the five elements to the extreme. However, it was still limited to the power. It had not expanded at all, so how could it be possible to build a true state of chaos? To be able to build such a great brilliance at this moment, to be able to produce an aura similar to the state of chaos was already extremely incredible for these five powers. At this moment, an illusory figure gradually condensed in this boundless gray brilliance. This figure was towering like a giant that could hold up the sky. In front of this figure, Luo Fan was like a speck of dust. If they were not careful, they might even neglect him. This figure was in the shape of a human, and it looked like an extremely strong man in his prime. His entire body was naked, and he held a huge axe that was almost the same size as this figure. This figure condensed at an unimaginable speed, and then became clearer and more substantial. When it finally stabilized, there was no longer a trace of illusion. They were no different from real living beings of flesh and blood. Around the burly man, the gray light seemed to be collapsing, revealing a larger and larger gap. This caused light and shadow to circulate around the muscular man's body, as if there were countless exciting events happening within it. Outsider, prepare to die. After the strong man completely condensed his body, he lightly shouted. This voice was not loud, but it was filled with a majestic and unparalleled aura. It was as if the entire world, the entire universe, and the boundless state of chaos were responding to this voice. It was as if they could explode with the strongest power according to any tone of this voice and any rise and fall of the voice. Faced with such a strong man, the understanding in Luo Fan's eyes became deeper and deeper. The feeling the strong man gave him was somewhat similar to that of the sword lunatic who split the world apart back then. However, this strong man was countless times grander and vaster than the sword lunatic. This must be the living being in the five elements impasse, the legendary god of creation who split the world apart. Such a thought instantly appeared in Luo Fan's mind. The Earth universe was different from the primordial world. The Earth universe had gone through countless eras, and each era was a brand new beginning. Everything from the old era would be completely washed away by this new era. Therefore, the memory of the creation of the Earth universe had long been annihilated in history after countless years and eras, and the truth could no longer be found. Under such circumstances, the Earth universe would naturally not be like the primordial world. Anyone with a little bit of cultivation would know that the existence that split the world apart was the great god Pangu. It was the great god Pangu who split the state of chaos and opened up the incomparably great primordial world. However, although the memory of the creation of the Earth universe had been annihilated in the passage of countless eras, but in the depths of the origin of life of all living beings, they could still vaguely know that the origin of the world was created by some great existence that split the state of chaos. Even if they had completely lost their memories, they could still find traces in the depths of their life instincts, leaving behind one legend after another about the creation of the world. And it was precisely because these legends were developed from the traces in the depths of their life instincts that the legends were generally similar to the real facts. But there was a huge difference in the details. As a result, almost every civilization had its own great god of creation, and the existence that split the world apart in the legends of every civilization was different. In the legends of the Earth universe, the one who split the world apart was Pangu. Coincidentally, he shared the same name as the great god of creation of the primordial world. Among the many intelligent civilizations that Luo Fan had found in the Earth universe, some of them were created by the great god Brahma, and some were the so-called heavenly lord of creation. By the same logic, it was unknown whether the five elements impasse was a projection of a certain space-time in the past, present, or future of the Earth universe, but also gave birth to a rather complete intelligent civilization. They naturally had their own creation legends, and naturally had the existence of the great god of creation. As for the name of this great god, it did not matter whether he was called Pangu, Brahma, or the heavenly lord of creation. In other words, now, after an unknown number of eras, perhaps only the legendary sages would know the name of the existence that truly created the Earth universe. The giant holding the giant axe in front of him was born from the chaos formed by the interweaving power of the five elements, and the aura that it emitted was so grand and majestic. It was so vast that it seemed as if everything in the universe was born with him and started because of him. This could only be matched by the great god of creation of this civilization. I see. Comprehending the void is not comprehending the void, but exhausting all the appearances that the eyes see to reach the meaning of the void. Luo Fan had already touched the threshold of the realm of comprehending the void. At this moment, when he saw how the power of the five elements condensed into chaos, and how this chaos gave birth to the great god of creation, he finally broke through the shackles that had been holding him back. The obstacles that prevented him from truly stepping into the realm of comprehending the void allowed him to instantly comprehend the true meaning of the realm, and he had 1 foot in the realm of comprehending the void. At this point, perhaps Luo Fan still needed a long period of cultivation to truly step into the realm of comprehending the void, but that was already only a matter of time. All the obstacles that had prevented him from stepping into the realm of comprehending the void had disappeared. As long as he had enough time and stabilized his current comprehension, he would naturally be able to reach the realm of comprehending the void. Such progress. To Luo Fan, it was simply a shocking joy. It was a shocking progress that he was willing to spend countless years to exchange for. This made Luo Fan, whose emotions had not fluctuated much for a long time, extremely happy. Unknowingly, a smile that came from the bottom of his heart and was infinitely infectious appeared on his face. Even the surrounding gray light seemed to become infinitely joyful. Although he only had 1 foot in the realm of comprehending the void, the benefits were already apparent to Luo Fan at this moment. At this moment, the world that he saw was several times deeper than before. In the past, many of the mysteries that he could only vaguely see and could not really grasp were now, like looking at the lines on his palm. There were no longer any secrets that existed. In an instant, countless principles flashed through his mind. In the past, he would need to spend a few days. After experimenting with countless combinations of powers, he could obtain them with just a thought. In the blink of an eye, thousands of combinations of powers that were similar to the light of destruction and the wave of analysis appeared in his mind. These combinations are indeed not perfect. When these combinations of powers appeared in his mind, Luo Fan also instantly understood the advantages and disadvantages. Such a thought flashed through his mind. He could sense the imperfections. This meant that he already knew how to improve it. With a turn of his mind, a brand new combination of tens of thousands of powers appeared in Luo Fan's mind. As soon as this combination appeared, a strange fluctuation was naturally produced around Luo Fan's body. It was as if the world was distorted by the appearance of this combination, as if the world could not bear this combination. Just by visualizing the combination in his mind, it had already produced such an effect. From this, it could be seen how mysterious this combination was and how powerful its power was. At this moment, the god of creation that was condensed from chaos finally noticed the changes in Luo Fan, and a solemn look flashed in his eyes. Without any hesitation, the giant axe in his hand slashed toward Luo Fan. This giant axe was extremely huge, comparable to the size of the body of the god of creation. In contrast, Luo Fan was like a speck of dust. Under normal circumstances, with such a ratio, the giant axe would not be able to lock onto Luo Fan at all. Even if it slashed down, it would not be able to produce a cleaving sound. It would only produce a crushing effect. However, it was clear that everything that was happening at this moment was not normal. When the axe slashed down, Luo Fan had a feeling that he was completely locked on. Although the giant axe was extremely huge, he knew that if he was hit by it, he would definitely not be crushed because he was too small. Instead, he would be split into countless pieces by the giant axe. This giant axe was the tool that split the heavens and earth in the legends of the intelligent civilization of the Five Elements impasse. One could naturally imagine how powerful it was. Although this god of creation was only born from the chaos condensed from 5 powers, there was still a world of difference between it and the real god of creation. However, each of the 5 powers was emitted by living beings that surpassed the great perfection realm, equivalent to the perishment realm. Moreover, they were emitted by many powers from the 5 regions. No matter how weak the god of creation that was condensed was, it would definitely not be in the perishment realm. Instead, it would truly be in the void comprehending realm. Compared to existences in the perishment realm, it was countless times more powerful. At this moment, in front of the axe, the gray brilliance continuously collapsed, turning into pieces of space-time. It tried its best to connect, wanting to form a complete world. As the axe advanced, all sorts of strange lights and shadows gradually appeared around it. These lights and shadows seemed like countless worlds were being born. It was as if countless living beings were struggling to survive within them. In the face of such an axe, if Luo Fan hadn't comprehended it before and hadn't stepped into the void comprehending realm, he would have only been able to use his escape method and stimulate all of his strength and magical abilities to escape, although the possibility of escaping with his life was quite high. After all, there was still a high chance that he would die and his soul would scatter. However, at this moment, this kind of if did not appear. Not only did it not appear, but he had even used this newly increased realm to comprehend a brand new power combination that was so powerful that it could produce shocking effects. In other words, it was a divine ability. Faced with the axe that could split the heavens and the earth, Luo Fan clasped his hands in front of him. A ray of light shot up from where his hands were clasped. This ray of light was a clear color. It was extremely mysterious, as if it was the most real substance in the world. The moment it appeared, the endless gray brilliance in the surroundings was directly annihilated. It did not even have the chance to turn back into the power of the five elements. It completely disappeared without a trace. As the gray brilliance was annihilated, the rules and laws of the world, as well as the time and space of the world, were also annihilated. However, wherever the brilliance passed, everything seemed to be annihilated. Everything turned into absolute nothingness. It should be known that the stability of a world depended on the toughness of the rules and laws of the world. However, even a perfect primordial world could not be compared to it. However, such a world and such a space-time were annihilated so easily. From this, one could see how terrifying and shocking the power of the clear brilliance was. The clear brilliance increased and finally condensed into a ball above Luo Fan's head. Furthermore, it continued to grow and expand. In the end, it formed an auspicious cloud the size of an acre above his head. It constantly surged and changed into all sorts of strange images, as if everything was wrapped within it. As soon as the auspicious cloud was formed, the axe of the god of creation had already struck the auspicious cloud. There was no strange sound, nor any fluctuations. When the axe struck the auspicious cloud, it seemed to have struck into another space-time. It directly sank into the auspicious cloud. From the point of contact, the axe quickly disappeared towards the end of the axe, which was where the god of creation was holding it. The auspicious cloud was only the size of an acre. Compared to the axe, it was just an insignificant speck. However, this incomparably huge axe did not resist at all in the face of such a tiny, auspicious cloud. In fact, it continued to sink into it in a manner that defied common sense. From head to tail, it actually completely disappeared without a trace in the time it took for a breath. The whole process was very fast and very natural. Such a huge axe directly sank into the small, auspicious cloud that was only the size of an acre. However, there was not the slightest bit of awkwardness. It even made people feel that the axe should have sunk into the cloud, and that the auspicious cloud should have directly devoured the axe. The god of creation was shocked. At the moment when the stomach of the axe was about to disappear, he finally let go of the axe in time to avoid the fate of disappearing with the axe. Good move. The god of creation opened his mouth, and his expression became more and more solemn. The god of creation had already entered the void, comprehending realm, but it was only the essence of life. Naturally, he could not comprehend the mysteries of the void, comprehending realm step by step like Luo Fan. The attack method he used was also directly condensed from the legend of the creation of heaven and earth, and was able to display the essence of the void understanding realm. However, it was unable to display the power that surpassed the essence of life, like the various divine abilities created by Luo Fan and the various combinations of powers. Therefore, although the attack of the giant axe was earth-shattering, it barely reached the attack of the void comprehending realm. For the destroyer, or in other words, for existences that could only unleash the power of the destroyer level, they naturally had an absolute advantage and could crush everything at will. However, for an existence like Luo Fan, who could create a power that surpassed his cultivation level and could unleash the power of the void comprehending realm while in the destroyer realm, it was still a little difficult. Moreover, at this moment, Luo Fan already had 1 foot in the void comprehending realm. This was the power that could be unleashed by the new combination of tens of thousands of powers, and it had even reached the peak of the void comprehending realm. It had even vaguely reached the threshold of the Tao integration realm. How could the god of creation understand such a method? However, although he did not understand his opponent's method, the god of creation was specially born to deal with Luo Fan and destroy Luo Fan. Naturally, he would not give up on dealing with Luo Fan just because he did not understand the god of creation's method. After calling out, his body shrank at an unimaginable speed without any hesitation. In just an instant, he shrank from a towering giant to less than 1,000 feet tall. Chapter 882. After shrinking, the god of creation didn't stop at all. He clenched his fists and punched toward Luo Fan with a destructive force. Its fist was so powerful that it blasted apart the countless space-times it had opened up with its axe, causing those space-times and the countless space-times that were about to merge together to form a complete world to instantly return to primordial chaos. It even went one step further, evolving from the primordial chaos composed of the 5 elements into an increasingly vast nothingness. The power of this fist was different from the power of the heaven-splitting axe. It was absolute destruction, and even the light of destruction that Luo Fan had condensed in the past wasn't any weaker. If such a power were to strike Luo Fan directly, even if Luo Fan had completely stepped into the void-comprehending realm and become a void-comprehending expert, he would not be able to withstand such an impact. Luo Fan's expression did not waver in the slightest in the face of this fist that was many times more powerful than usual due to its condensation. With a slight thought, the clear cloud above his head fluctuated in an extremely strange way that no living being could see the process. It instantly separated Luo Fan and the fist. Although the power of the 2 fists was enough to shatter the surrounding chaos into nothingness, it was still not enough in the face of the power combination that easily turned the heaven-splitting axe into nothingness. When the cloud came into contact with the 2 fists, there wasn't any ripple, and the might of the fists was completely eliminated. There was nothing unusual about the entire process. It was as if the fist itself had no power at all. This process was very similar to when the heaven-splitting axe struck the auspicious cloud. However, there were many differences. The biggest difference was that his fist didn't dissipate like the giant axe from before when its power dissipated. The 2 fists sank deep into the auspicious clouds, but they were still intact. After being compressed and condensed, its toughness is indeed much stronger than before. However, if you think you can beat me with this, you're delusional. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind before the god of creation had the chance to continue his attack. The cloud trembled and changed shape in an instant. Countless chains rushed out of the cloud and drilled into the body of the god of creation. It penetrated deep into the core of power within the body. As the chains penetrated deeper, the god of creation let out a painful roar. The power in his body suddenly receded like a tide, and his body gradually withered. He even lost the strength to raise his hand, let alone continue to attack. At this time, how could the god of creation not understand that he had become a fish on the chopping board? For a moment, endless humiliation and grief surged in his heart. His body struggled frantically as he roared in anger. However, the result was obvious. Even when it was at its peak, it was unable to escape Luo Fan's control. At this moment, the core of its power had been locked onto by Luo Fan, and all the power in its body had been completely out of his control. How could it possibly struggle free? Its face turned green and red. After its body trembled violently for a while, it finally softened into a ball. Luo Fan knew that the god of creation had just been born, and was born from the chaos condensed from the 5 elements. It couldn't have many memories outside of the battle. Therefore, he didn't have the thought of looking for what he wanted in the memory of the god of creation. After subduing the god of creation, he didn't ask the god of creation and directly concentrated the improved analytical wave into the body of the god of creation. The analytical wave looked no different from the original analytical wave on the surface, but it had been improved by countless times. The strength of the analytical wave was more than 10,000 times stronger than before. Under such circumstances, when the analytical wave was concentrated into the body of the god of creation, the amount of information that Luo Fan obtained in an instant had reached an unimaginable level. Even if this information was transferred to the mind of any other innate Zenith Heaven cultivator, it would make the innate Zenith Heaven cultivator fall into a state of confusion like when he suffered the information backlash of the era projection. It would make the innate zenith heaven cultivator fall into a state of confusion, like when he suffered the information backlash of the era projection, and it would take a long time for him to recover. However, this was naturally nothing to Luo Fan. The analytical wave was modified by him after he stepped halfway into the void understanding stage, so he naturally had an extremely deep understanding of the power of the analytical wave. He naturally had a deep understanding of its power, not to mention that his mind could easily withstand the impact of such information. Even if his mind could not withstand it, he could easily find a way to make himself withstand it. Therefore, the influx of information only allowed Luo Fan to have a deeper understanding of the interior of the God of Creation's body, but it did not cause any other side effects. As the information continuously surged in, Luo Fan finally found what he was looking for in the body of the God of Creation. It was a clue about the core of the five elements impasse. That's right, it was just a clue. Originally, Luo Fan had the idea that the God of Creation was condensed from the supreme power of the five elements region, and was born from the condensed power of the five living beings that surpassed the great perfection stage. The core of the five elements impasse was very likely to be in its body. But at this moment, after searching all over the God of Creation's body, what he finally found in the depths of his body, in the depths of his life essence, was only a hint of the existence of the core of the five elements danger ground. This kind of clue was something he could obtain in the previous checkpoints after he stepped into the checkpoint and observed it for a bit. Such a gain could not be said to be huge. However, compared to the original situation where he could not find any trace of the existence of the core in all the areas of the five elements impasse for tens of thousands of light years, such a gain could not be said to be small. As for the above distracting thoughts, Luo Fan naturally would not waste time thinking about it. After he grasped the traces of clues, he no longer hesitated. With a move of his mind, the green chain trembled slightly, and the God of Creation let out a shrill scream. The scream shook the world condensed from the five forces, causing the entire world to shake violently. Then, after the scream, the God of Creation collapsed with a loud bang. From the original perfect giant form, it instantly turned into a cloud of smoke, like a detonated bomb, exploding in all directions. The power of the God of Creation's explosion was earth-shattering, and this world was even more stable than the perfect world. It was even tougher, but it still could not withstand such a powerful explosion. In an instant, the entire world collapsed with a loud bang, just like how Luo Fan behaved when he passed every checkpoint in the past. It turned into countless fragments, produced countless powder, and spread in all directions. In the end, it completely disappeared without a trace, revealing the scene behind this space and time. That was the scene where the gold element region originally was. At this moment, it was also in chaos. Although the upheaval caused by the creature that surpassed the great perfection stage had stabilized, the entire gold element region had undergone a tremendous change compared to before. The entire gold element region was no longer like the strange starry sky from before, but had turned into chaos. It looked like there were no longer many planets formed from metal-type power. The entire metal-type region was filled with murky golden light. Ordinary living beings would not be able to survive here. Ordinary creatures could not even see their own fingers. Luo Fan naturally would not be affected by the turbid golden light. Putting aside the unimaginable adaptability of his destroyer-level body, the auspicious cloud that was still condensed outside his body could easily isolate all changes in the outside world, creating for Luo Fan the most perfect place to live. As for how stable the living place, created by the auspicious cloud, was, it could be easily seen from the fact that the shockwave produced by the explosion of the God of Creation, which could destroy the entire world, did not affect him at all. At this moment, Luo Fan was floating in the boundless turbid golden light with the auspicious cloud on his head. In front of him, there were 3 thin chains hanging down from the clear cloud, and they were locked onto a strange grayish mist. The mist was surging. It seemed like it could dissipate at any time, but it was extremely stable, as if even the toughest diamond in the universe could not compare to it in terms of toughness. Although it was constantly tumbling, it had a kind of eternal and unshakable charm to it. This was the thing that was related to the core of the five elements impasse. It was also the strange thing that existed in the depths of the God of creation's life source, and the clue to the core of the five elements impasse was attached to. This thing was not energy, nor was it material. Instead, it was an extremely wondrous thing that seemed to be between existence and non-existence. It seemed like the materialization of laws, but it also seemed like a product formed when the combination of matter and energy was pushed to the limit. There were some extremely fine fragments of the brand. These fragments were intermittent and scattered throughout the entire mist. Every fragment of the brand was extremely incomplete and damaged. Even Luo Fan could not see what the complete form of the brand looked like. The fragments of the brand were none other than the origin brand of the five elements impasse. They were closely related to the core of the five elements impasse and could easily resonate with it. As long as he could complete this brand, he would naturally be able to know the appearance of the five elements impasse's origin, and he would naturally be able to easily find the core of the five elements impasse. This did not seem difficult. After all, there were countless imprint fragments in this strange existence. Moreover, these imprint fragments were all different. If one could extract all of them and reassemble them, one would be able to obtain a relatively complete imprint. However, this was only what it looked like. One had to know that there were countless fragments of the brand, and each fragment was so broken that it was definitely not easy to form a complete brand. Moreover, after spending a great deal of effort to assemble it, it was also worth pondering how complete the imprint he obtained was. It was possible that he would obtain a complete brand, or it was also possible that he would obtain a rather damaged brand that was not even 10% or 20% complete. Even Luo Fan could not say for sure which situation it was. It was easier said than done. Luo Fan instantly knew how difficult it was to assemble the fragments of the brand in this strange existence into a complete brand. However, he did not feel the slightest bit discouraged. With a slight thought, countless mysteries of power flashed across his mind. Soon, a power combination consisting of thousands of powers appeared in his mind. In fact, this new power combination was not much different from his modified analytical wave. Therefore, it did not produce the same phenomenon as when the power combination of the auspicious cloud appeared. It was as if nothing had happened. Luo Fan's body was still floating calmly in the void, and the perfect living place created by the auspicious cloud was still calm, without any changes. With a thought, the thousands of powers were transformed by Luo Fan and condensed in front of him. In the end, it turned into a strange hollow sphere. The hollow sphere was extremely dark, and it looked like a black hole the size of a soccer ball. After the hollow sphere appeared, it produced a strange suction force, which was directed at the strange mist that was locked by the clear chain. The cloud of mist was unable to resist the suction force that was directed at it. It easily broke free from the chain and entered the hollow sphere. Not a single strand of mist was left out. As the mist broke free, the clear chain shrank and returned to the auspicious cloud above Luo Fan's head. The auspicious cloud shook and tumbled, then calmed down. After the black hollow sphere absorbed the mist, it began to spin rapidly. During the spinning process, countless strange lights and shadows flashed across the surface of the black sphere. These lights and shadows flickered without any pattern, but vaguely, they followed a strange pattern and produced an indescribable mysterious rhythm. Any living creature would be involuntarily attracted to it, and their minds would enter an inexplicable state of clarity. This process lasted for a full 2 hours. After 2 hours, the rotation of the hollow black sphere suddenly stopped. All the phenomena disappeared completely. Then, the hollow sphere shook, and a broken brand quietly floated up from the black sphere. It floated in front of Luo Fan and slowly rotated. This imprint seemed to be formed by countless strange lines. The entire brand was extremely complicated. It was so complicated that if the lines that formed this brand were to be spread out, it would take tens of thousands of light years to describe its specific length. Such a long line was used to outline a fist-sized, three-dimensional brand. From this, one could imagine how complicated it was. If Luo Fan were to successfully assemble such a complicated brand, it would take him at least a few years or even decades. But at this moment, with the help of the strange hollow sphere that was formed by thousands of different powers, it only took him an hour to assemble it successfully. But at this moment, with the help of the strange hollow sphere that was formed by thousands of different powers, it only took him an hour to assemble it successfully. It's actually such a complicated brand. It won't be that easy to complete it. Luo Fan looked at the broken brand and could not help but frown. He had to complete the foundation of this imprint. Luo Fan already had it. Previously, he had used Analytical Wave to explore the entire 5 elements impasse. So he had a relatively complete understanding of the 5 regions of the 5 elements impasse. These imprints were the source imprints of the 5 elements impasse. The foundation of their existence was naturally the 5 regions of the 5 elements impasse. The mysteries that formed them were naturally rooted from the mysteries of the various regions of the 5 elements impasse. Therefore, as long as one had a sufficient understanding of the 5 regions of the 5 elements impasse, one would naturally be able to find the missing parts by comparing them with the broken brand. Through analysis and deduction, one would definitely be able to complete the brand in the end. However, just like before, the brand was simply too complicated and there were quite a lot of missing parts. If Luo Fan were to analyze and deduce what exactly was missing, it would take him an extremely long time. A few years, a few decades, a few hundred years, a few thousand years, or even tens of thousands of years were all possible. Evidently, the flow of time on the Era Bridge was tens of thousands of times slower than the outside world. Time was precious, and it was also tens of thousands of times more precious than the outside world. Luo Fan could afford to waste a few years, but a few decades, a few hundred years, or even a few thousand years, that was something that Luo Fan could not afford. With a slight thought, countless mysteries of power flowed through his mind once again. The combination of the hollow black balls from before was also disassembled and combined with even more mysteries of power. Even though Luo Fan had already stepped into the void comprehending state, it was still rather difficult for him to achieve his goal. Therefore, he spent half a day before a brand new power combination that was formed from tens of thousands of strange powers finally appeared in his mind. Compared to the power combination that was formed from the hollow black balls from before, which could be called the combination sphere, this power combination was many times more exquisite. As soon as the combination took shape in Luo Fan's mind, the surrounding space began to fluctuate wonderfully. The originally turbid golden light within a few kilometers began to clear up. Specks of golden light condensed into strange substances that seemed to be floating in the clear golden light, as if they were gradually condensing into something. This can be called the completion box. Luo Fan could sense the changes immediately. He could not help but smile as such a thought flashed through his mind. Chapter 883. As soon as the black box was formed, it naturally gave off a mysterious presence. The surrounding space was naturally affected by it, faintly turning towards a perfect balance. There seemed to be traces of wood, water, fire, and earth elements in the originally pure metal element. That was not all. Once the 5 elements were completed with the 4 additional attributes, there were also other attributes that surpassed the 5 elements. However, they were the attributes that a normal world and space-time should possess. However, they were only vaguely present. At first glance, there seemed to be such a change, but if one sensed it closely, they would know that this was just the materialization of the black box's presence affecting the surroundings. When the black box was around, there would be this illusion of transformation, but once the black box left, these changes would return to normal. Just its existence alone could affect the surrounding space and create such a strange illusion. The profoundness of the black box could be imagined. Luo Fan looked at the black box and smiled. He lifted his hand and beckoned. The black box produced an invisible suction force that targeted the extremely complicated, incomplete imprint floating in the air. The imprint was unable to withstand the suction force at all. It flew towards the black box without any hesitation. It looked like it was about to crash into the black box. At this moment, an invisible power suddenly descended from the air and slammed towards the incomplete imprint at an unimaginable speed. Although this power was powerful, it was only limited to the level of the Perishment Realm. If it were to directly attack Luo Fan, with Luo Fan's current state of having 1 foot in the Void Comprehending Realm, it would be impossible for him to suffer much damage. However, even if that Tatter brand was unimaginably complicated, even if the lines that made up the brand could only be described in tens of thousands of light years, it was still just a brand. It did not possess any power, nor was it supported by an unfathomable realm of cultivation. Under such circumstances, if this kind of power was hit by the power of the Annihilation Realm, no matter how profound the mark was, it would be destroyed. No matter how complicated its structure was, it was impossible for it to be perfectly preserved. Just how fast was the speed at which his power crossed over? It had even surpassed time and space. When Luo Fan sensed its existence, it had already arrived above the imprint. It had already arrived above the mark, and was about to strike it. Faced with this kind of power, if it was Luo Fan himself, unless he was extremely vigilant, he definitely would not be able to stop the attack. At this time, Luo Fan was not completely focused on the black box, but most of his energy was focused on it. How could this be considered as being extremely vigilant against attacks from external powers? However, while Luo Fan was not extremely vigilant against attacks from external powers, he could not stop the power from destroying the imprint. There was no way to stop this power from destroying the brand. But don't forget that at this moment, there was an auspicious cloud above his head formed by tens of thousands of different powers that could easily destroy a great god of creation at the void and lightning stage. That auspicious cloud was so mysterious that Luo Fan naturally didn't need to have any thoughts to be able to move. The moment the power that almost surpassed time and space attacked the broken mark, the auspicious cloud trembled slightly, and thousands of clear chains appeared on its own. The moment the power almost surpassed time and space to attack the broken imprint, the auspicious cloud shook slightly and produced thousands of clear chains. It directly rushed into the powerful power. It was as if it had locked onto a physical object. That was close. At that moment, Luo Fan finally reacted, and a look of relief appeared on his face. He first controlled the black box to swallow the broken imprint, and only then did he have time to deal with the thing that was locked by the thousands of clear chains. It was a strange existence that was constructed from 5 types of power of the 5 elements in an extremely mysterious way. Although this existence was still power in essence, its manifestation had already surpassed power. Just like the light of destruction that Luo Fan constructed, it had formed a form that transcended its original form. This form looked like a cloud of fog, constantly surging between the chains, trying its best to break through the shackles of the chains. It actually has a will. Luo Fan looked at the cloud of fog. He had an exceptionally grim expression on his face. The cloud of fog was not just pure power. In the depths of the 5 types of power, there was also an extremely obscure and majestic will. This will was vastly different from the will of ordinary living beings. It did not have the complexity of ordinary living beings. Instead, it was extremely pure, as if it had been born purely for the sake of controlling the cloud of fog. However, behind this extreme purity, one could faintly sense a supreme will controlling everything. This hidden will was unimaginably powerful. The supreme willpower was unimaginably powerful. Even Luo Fan's willpower, which was already half a step into the void comprehending realm, seemed to be lacking in the face of such a willpower. When Luo Fan felt the existence of this willpower, he couldn't help but feel a sense of seriousness. This is definitely not the will of some kind of living being. This is the will of the entire place. All of a sudden, this thought appeared out of nowhere in Luo Fan's mind. As soon as this thought appeared, the various inexplicable things that Luo Fan had felt in the place were instantly perfectly explained. Why would a being that surpassed the great perfection realm have the memory of an outsider like him? Why would it so straightforwardly refine the entire planet it lived on into power to attack Luo Fan? Why would a being that surpassed the great perfection realm from other regions transmit its power to this place so tacitly? And why could it be transmitted to this place? If all of this was because the 5 elements impasse had given birth to a will, then it made sense. That being that surpassed the paragon level was just a projection. To be able to know that there were beings coming here a long time ago, wanting to destroy this five elements impasse, it was definitely the will of this five elements impasse. After discovering Luo, Fan, and the others, it directly engraved these memories in the depths of these beings' souls. Only in this way could these memories be so perfect. That was why these living beings that surpassed the great perfection realm thought that they had known these memories a long time ago, and that there was a mysterious lord above them who had predicted the arrival of an outsider like Luo Fan a long time ago. As for the beings that surpassed the great perfection stage in the other regions, it was also because of the will of the five elements that they were able to transmit their power here. Moreover, it was precisely because of the existence of the will that they were able to construct such a mysterious world and launch such an astonishing attack against Luo Fan. Apart from these, all the other details that originally did not make sense now made sense. When he thought of all of this, Luo Fan was already convinced that there was a will in the place. I didn't expect the entire projection to give birth to a will. An inexplicable smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. Although the previous thousands of times were different, the process of clearing the levels was somewhat repetitive. Although it gave him a lot of benefits, it also made him feel that things became more and more boring as he became more and more familiar with it. He felt that the process of clearing the levels had become more and more mechanical. Under such circumstances, although this checkpoint had brought him a lot of trouble, it had also broken his dull and boring feeling and made him look forward to this checkpoint even more. Moreover, this situation where the five elements impasse directly gave birth to a will was also a considerable revelation to him. Based on the previous performances, the will of the five elements impasse clearly had some kind of restriction. Otherwise, it could directly control the power of the entire five elements impasse to destroy Luo Fan and the others. Why would it need to rely on those living beings that surpassed the great perfection realm? Especially just now, when the will of the five elements impasse directly controlled the power to attack the broken brand, the power it displayed was actually limited to the perishment realm. This made him even more certain that the willpower was greatly restricted, whether it was in terms of power or in terms of its nature. And this kind of restriction was to Luo Fan's comprehension of the will of heaven and earth, or the will of the great Tao. Or rather, the legendary will of heaven had many benefits, which naturally made Luo Fan quite happy. Normal heaven and earth seemed to have no will, but that was only in a narrow sense. In a broad sense, heaven and earth and the great Tao all had some kind of will that ordinary living beings could not understand. This kind of will, when displayed, was luck, was the will of heaven. In other words, it was fate. This kind of will might not have obvious thinking and intelligence that living beings could feel, but it was extremely grand, controlling everything and defining everything. If one could sense this kind of will and understand this kind of will, one would be able to know how the heaven and earth operated and how the great Tao controlled everything in the world. One would even be able to control one's own luck and the illusory fate. It was just that this kind of will was far too different from the will of living beings. Even though Luo Fan already had 1 foot in the emptiness realm, it was impossible for him to understand the form of existence of this kind of will, let alone understand it. According to Luo Fan's guesses, perhaps only the legendary saints could use their unbelievable will to understand the will of heaven and earth and the great Tao. At that moment, the will born from the five elements impasse was still extremely obscure, and it was clearly worlds apart from the true will of heaven and earth and the great Tao. In fact, it had even reached a level where they could not be mentioned in the same breath. However, this kind of will was illusory after all. Even if there was such a huge difference between it and the true will of heaven and earth, the forms of existence of the two definitely had some essential similarities. If one could carry out in-depth research on the existence of this kind of will, he would naturally be able to understand some of the forms of existence of the will of heaven and earth and the great Tao. Although it was impossible to directly understand the forms of existence of the will of heaven and earth and the great Tao, he would definitely be able to know some ways to obtain greater benefits in a world. If he continued to deepen his understanding of this kind of will, he might be able to understand the will of heaven and earth and the great Tao when he finally reached the Tao Master Realm. Of course, this ultimate possibility was still too illusory for Luo Fan at this time. He could only wantonly think about it and would not really pin his hopes on it. However, since I set foot on this bridge of times, I have made great progress that I dared not imagine before. From the 8th stage of the immortal realm to the peak of the 9th stage, my realm has increased by tens of thousands of times. I was originally beyond the primordial zenith heaven, but now I have 1 foot in the emptiness realm, and it seems that it is only a matter of time before I truly become an emptiness-comprehending expert. As he weighed the value of the 5 elements impasse, such a thought emerged in Luo Fan's mind. After this thought appeared, Luo Fan seemed to have vaguely grasped something. This kind of thing flashed across his mind. He clearly knew how important this thing was to him, but he could not really grasp it at all. This kind of feeling of loss made even Luo Fan feel a little depressed. What is it? What did I think of before? Luo Fan's brows gradually furrowed, and a kind of distress and hesitation appeared on his face. He thought about it carefully, trying his best to keep his mind and will in check. He kept rummaging in his memory, trying to completely grasp the idea that he had thought of before, but had not completely grasped it. However, the thought was already over. It was also an extremely difficult thing for Luo Fan to grasp it again. Hence, after searching for more than an hour, Luo Fan did not find anything. I was thinking about some of the benefits that the Bridge of Times brought to me before, and I couldn't grasp that idea. Could it be related to this? Since he could not find that idea, Luo Fan was unwilling to give up, so he could only reconstruct his thoughts. He readjusted his body and mind to the same state as before and tried to use the same state to make that idea resurface. However, this was obviously not a simple thing. That idea did not exist at all. Even though he had readjusted his body and mind to the same state as before, that idea did not seem to exist at all and did not resurface at all. After repeating it millions of times, 3 days and 3 nights had passed. Luo Fan finally had no choice but to admit that his opportunity had already passed, and that idea wanted to resurface. If he wanted to resurface, he would have to rely on new opportunities in the future. After letting out a sigh, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. Over the past 3 days, the black box that had flown out of the black box, which was a completion box, had been completely filled with the brand in his hand. During these 3 days and 3 nights, Luo Fan had wholeheartedly constructed all kinds of physical and mental states, searching for the idea that had suddenly flashed through his mind, but he had not been able to grasp it. It was to complete the extremely complex imprint of the completion box. He did not care at all, and allowed the extremely complicated brand to continue floating above the black box. During this process, the will of the extreme 5 elements ground did not move at all. Perhaps it was because it had already recognized the might of the auspicious cloud the previous time, and knew that even if it released the same power again, it would not be able to break through the auspicious cloud's defenses and extinguish the brand. Or was it that the will was brewing a more powerful attack? As he held the unimaginably complicated brand, Luo Fan completely swept away all the thoughts that had been lingering in his mind for the past 3 days and 3 nights. He began to sense the brand in detail. The brand was extremely complicated and profound, and its form of existence was very mysterious. It seemed to have fused with space, yet it also seemed to have transcended space. It seemed to fuse with some sort of existence. It seemed to have become a separate entity. Nothing in the outside world could affect it at all, and it did not form any connection with it at all. The brand was not stationary. Instead, it was constantly moving. The lines that spread out from the brand, which could only be described in 10,000 light years, were all moving according to some sort of extremely complicated and profound pattern. All the lines interweaved together, causing the brand to seem to be squirming slightly, and also like it was jumping slightly. A mysterious aura was being emitted from the mark. As he looked at the brand, Luo Fan even felt as if he was looking down at the entire place from high up in the sky. It really is the origin brand of the place. Looking at the brand, Luo Fan smiled for the first time in the past 3 days and 3 nights. With a slight thought, he entered the perspective brought about by someone who had 1 foot in the void comprehending realm. In an instant, the imprint in his eyes underwent a tremendous change. The entire imprint's existence was extremely similar to the 5-element impasse. It looked like a miniature version of the 5-element impasse. There was an indescribable ripple that appeared out of nowhere, fusing with the brand. It seemed to be affecting the brand, but it also seemed to be communicating with the brand. Sensing the ripple, Luo Fan immediately understood that it was the resonance between the brand and the core of the place. It was the inseparable resonance that formed the ripple. In other words, the ripples were connected to the seal and the core of the 5 elements death trap. If he wanted to find the core of the 5-element impasse, all he had to do was go against the fluctuations, and he would naturally be able to find the core of the 5-element impasse. Sensing the ripple, the smile on Luo Fan's face gradually disappeared. The closer it was to a time like this, the more careful he had to be. With the perspective of someone who had 1 foot in void comprehending stage, Luo Fan was able to sense where the invisible ripple was connected to. Chapter 884. After finding the location, Luo Fan no longer hesitated. With a sway of his body, he took a step forward and directly stepped into the nothingness, heading towards the faintly discernible space-time. First published by /Xinxing/ with the power of Luo Fan's current abilities, as long as he could sense a location, he would be able to find a way to get there. Even if the space he sensed was faintly discernible at the moment, it was no exception. In the process of crossing over to the strange space-time, the surrounding laws and rules rapidly dissipated. An increasingly clean and pure void gradually enveloped him. The entire process was so mysterious. It was completely different from the various movements that Luo Fan had made in the past. It contained a mystery that he had never comprehended before. In other words, it was an unbelievable reorganization of some of the insignificant mysteries that he had not paid attention to in the past, forming a completely new mystery that Luo Fan had never thought of. For Luo Fan, this had a lot of benefits. It made him feel that his mind was constantly rising. The various comprehensions that he had gained after taking a step into the void comprehension realm continuously replayed in his mind in another way. For Luo Fan, this had a lot of benefits. Although it could not allow him to completely step into the void comprehension realm, it made his realm become more active, as if he could directly enter the void comprehension realm at any time. In this state, Luo Fan's mind became extremely empty. His thoughts also became clearer because of this. Suddenly, a thought appeared in Luo Fan's mind. As soon as this thought appeared, Luo Fan's expression froze. His entire body suddenly stopped halfway towards the faintly discernible space-time. Outside, where Luo Fan was originally at, where the metal elemental region was, Luo Fan's figure had become faintly discernible. It seemed real, but also very illusory. Upon closer inspection, one would find that every single spot was empty. However, even though he was illusory, he exuded an aura that was absolutely real, making it impossible for anyone to associate the word illusory with him. Luo Fan didn't care about the situation in his position at all. At this very moment, all of his attention was focused on the single thought that appeared in his mind. This thought was none other than the one he had spent 3 days and 3 nights trying to rebuild his body and mind, but to no avail. No matter how hard he tried, this thought had never appeared in his mind. At this moment, his mind had entered a state of emptiness, and he didn't think about searching for that thought at all. However, it came unexpectedly. The mysteriousness of life really made one sigh with emotion. If the correct method is used to clear the bridge of eras, it will bring endless benefits to a cultivator's cultivation. Every time you clear a stage, you will obtain a certain benefit. If all the benefits are gathered in one place, you might even be able to increase your cultivation by tens of millions of times, stepping into a realm that you wouldn't even dare to imagine in the past. Thus, you will be closer to the sage realm. This fact is so similar to the path to becoming a sage. This was the thought that appeared in Luo Fan's mind. Could it be that this era vortex isn't formed naturally, but was specially set up by a powerful figure for many cultivators? Is it the same goal as the path to becoming a sage in the great Tianyuan world? When that thought appeared, countless thoughts appeared in his mind like an avalanche, making his thoughts become complicated and messy. That won't happen. Even though every single one of the 9,999 barriers around the era vortex is extremely profound, and passing through every single barrier is extremely beneficial to living beings, it's absolutely impossible to rely on these 9,999 barriers to allow a golden immortal to attain the saint realm. It's even possible. It's impossible for a living being to become a Tao master. This can't be another path to becoming a sage. However, the more I think about it, the more I feel that the possibility of these 9,999 stages being formed naturally is too small. Even if it's not a path to becoming a sage, specially set up by a powerful figure, there must be some other purpose. Now that I think about it, there are many benefits in the 3,333 stages. They seem to be forcing cultivators to break through the primordial zenith heaven and step into the annihilation realm. And from the 3,334 stages to the 6,666 stage, it seems to be forcing cultivators who have already become annihilation realm to step into the void comprehending realm. All kinds of thoughts reverberated in Luo Fan's mind, and for a moment, his complexion kept changing. Ever since he stepped onto the Bridge of Times, he had passed more than 6,000 checkpoints, and he had obtained most of the benefits from the checkpoints. And these benefits pushed his cultivation realm to continuously increase, pushed his realm to continuously grow. At this moment, he had finally grown to the point where he had 1 foot in the void comprehending realm. He didn't think much of these facts before, and he even faintly rejoiced at his wonderful encounter. But now that he thought about it carefully, there seemed to be something that couldn't be ignored behind the increase of his cultivation realm and the growth of his realm. The first 3,333 checkpoints were all the projections of the eras. After destroying those projections, he would be able to obtain all the information from the moment he stepped into that era until the era was naturally destroyed and replaced by the next era. At this moment, it seemed like it was a way for him to accumulate endless knowledge and understand the development of different eras. In the end, he would be able to see through all appearances and comprehend the true meaning of perishment. And from the 3,334 stages onwards, each stage was a projection of a forbidden land. Within the projection of the forbidden land, there were extremely powerful beings similar to the annihilation realm. After destroying the projection of the forbidden land in the end, what he obtained was the origin of the forbidden land. While it contained endless information about the forbidden land, it also contained endless essence, chi, and energy. By the looks of it now, it was clearly to provide similar opponents for cultivators who had just entered the annihilation realm. They provided endless essence chi so that the cultivator could stabilize their annihilation realm and raise their realm to the peak of the annihilation realm. When the conditions were right, they would naturally comprehend the true meaning of void comprehending realm and step into the void comprehending realm. This entire process was untraceable, but the guiding principle was so clear that the more Luo Fan thought about it, the more certain he was that this was not a coincidence. So that's how it is. When he thought of all this, Luo Fan's expression became extremely complicated. He was a little shocked, a little angry, a little ashamed, and a little confused. But no matter how complicated his expression was, there wasn't a trace of fear in it. Luo Fan's will had already been tempered to an incomparably firm state after experiencing an unknown number of trillions of years of cultivation. Emotions like fear were already completely under his control. In the face of an unparalleled and powerful opponent, what he could feel was not fear, but endless fighting spirit and even confidence. At that moment, there seemed to be an unparalleled almighty hidden behind the 9,999 checkpoints. However, Luo Fan did not feel fear towards that almighty because of this, even if that almighty was powerful and had reached a realm that he could not fathom. He could easily create or modify the era vortex. If he attacked her, even if he was 1,000,000 times more powerful, he would not be able to withstand a gentle pinch of his finger. However, he would not feel fear because of this. Instead, he would only be shocked by the almighty being's divine ability. He would only be angry that he was indirectly toyed with. He would only be ashamed that he could not see the truth clearly. He would only be confused about the almighty being's objective. However, he would not feel fear. The first 3,333 checkpoints can allow cultivators to enter the annihilation realm. The middle 3,333 checkpoints can allow cultivators to enter the void comprehending realm. The last 3,333 checkpoints might allow cultivators to enter the Tao integration realm. Or, the later checkpoints are different. They are not just divided into sections. At most, they will allow cultivators to enter the transcendence realm, which is a higher realm. In this way, the path formed by these 9,999 checkpoints can be called the Tao integration path or the transcendence path. Luo Fan's expression changed for a long time before he let out a long sigh and thought to himself, the great primordial heaven and earth, which allowed cultivators to reach the end of the path to become a saint, was known as the path to becoming a saint. If these 9,999 checkpoints could allow a living being to eventually become a Tao integration entity and step into the Tao integration realm, that would naturally be the Tao integration path. If these checkpoints could allow living beings to become transcendents and step into the transcendence realm, that would naturally be the Tao integration path. Perhaps this path is only an experiment, a rehearsal. After a long time, he sighed. After a long time, Luo Fan could not help but let out a sigh. After sighing, Luo Fan suppressed these thoughts. With a thought, he continued to walk the path that he had been halfway through. Although the many thoughts he had before were not epiphanies, nor were they comprehensions of some profound truth for Luo Fan, they were still quite beneficial. They allowed him to have a deeper understanding of the five-element impasse. He was able to isolate all sorts of complicated and chaotic factors faster and directly understand the key to the five-element impasse. Under these circumstances, he walked toward the faintly discernible space-time where the core was. It was much easier and faster than before. In just a breath's time, his surroundings suddenly became empty. He arrived at a space-time that was dead silent. Even laws, power, and essence did not exist. In fact, the time and space in this space-time seemed to be in between existence and non-existence. It was as if they did not exist. In the center of this strange space-time, there was a small, illusory piece of land. This piece of land was not big. It was only a few 100,000 feet in radius. However, it was all-encompassing. Almost everything in the five-element impasse was included in it. Moreover, this inclusion did not just stack the 5 regions of the five-element impasse on the piece of land. Instead, it directly overlapped the 5 pieces of land in the five-element impasse. They complemented each other and formed a complete piece of strange land that transcended the five-element impasse. There were countless living beings on this piece of land, as well as all sorts of strange terrains. At first glance, it seemed to be full of life. However, with a closer look, one would know that the various scenes on this piece of land were just scenes formed by the operation of the laws. All the living beings were just images. There was no life at all. Luo Fan took a look at this piece of land and knew that this piece of land was the core of the five-element impasse. The will of the five-element impasse was also on this piece of land. In other words, it had fused with this piece of land. Although Luo Fan had previously thought that the road formed by these 9,999 checkpoints was either a road of Tao integration or a road of transcendence, and that there was a powerful and unparalleled power hidden behind it, this did not make him give up. Instead, it made him face the next many checkpoints with even more exuberant fighting spirit. Faced with this piece of land that was most likely hiding the will of the Forbidden Land, which contained some mysterious existence similar to the will of heaven and earth and the will of the Great Path, he did not intend to change his original plan. With a slight thought, his perception instantly enveloped the entire piece of land. Although the space-time he was in was strange, it was still a space-time after all. Since he had 1 foot in the void-comprehending realm, he could easily search the entire space-time with his superb perception, not to mention this piece of land with a radius of hundreds of thousands of feet. As soon as his perception enveloped the piece of land, a shocking, vast will suddenly erupted from the piece of land and collided with Luo Fan's perception that had enveloped the piece of land. At the same time, at that moment, endless power blasted towards Luo Fan from another space-time at an unimaginable speed. The power was so powerful that it shook the heavens and the earth. It was tens of millions of times more powerful than all the power in Luo Fan's body at the moment. Furthermore, the power was extremely condensed and contained the realm of the void, comprehending realm, resulting in endless changes. The speed at which the power descended was so fast that it even surpassed time and space. However, Luo Fan had already raised his vigilance to the peak, so he could still sense the nature of the power. He could sense that the power contained the endless essence of the 5 elements, which included all sorts of familiar things that Luo Fan had sensed in various areas of the 5 elements through the analytical wave. This is condensing everything in the entire 5-element impasse. Such a thought appeared in Luo Fan's mind in an instant. The auspicious cloud above his head still existed at the moment. In the face of such power, Luo Fan did not need to control it, and it naturally changed. This time, because the power was too powerful and condensed, the auspicious cloud did not directly go up like before. Instead, it abruptly condensed into a thin curtain in the void, covering the sky and covering the earth as it wrapped around the power. The power contained a power that was tens of millions of times more powerful than that of Luo Fan. The auspicious cloud that Luo Fan condensed was a combination of tens of thousands of powers, and its profoundness had even reached the peak of the void comprehending realm. However, after all, it was only formed by Luo Fan's power. In contrast, the disparity with the power was too great. Under such circumstances, even though the curtain formed by the auspicious clouds did not collide with the power in a crude and barbaric manner, it had millions of intricate transformations and countless methods to deflect the force, and contained the profound mysteries of martial arts. It was impossible for it to be as simple as it seemed. It contained infinite profoundness of magic. However, it was unable to completely eliminate the disparity in power that was tens of millions of times. In an instant, the curtain that was condensed by the auspicious cloud suddenly collapsed. The power shrank by more than half, but it still slammed down on Luo Fan with great force. During this process, Luo Fan only felt an indescribable power lock onto him, making him feel that even if he fled to the ends of the earth and escaped the infinite space-time, he would not be able to escape the bombardment of this power. Faced with such a situation, if Luo Fan was not prepared, he would definitely not be able to react in time. He would be directly hit by the power and die, his soul dispersing. However, it was obvious that Luo Fan was not unprepared. He had condensed the auspicious cloud above his head, partly to guard against any interference from the 5 elements' danger ground of 5 elements. But more importantly, it was to allow his strength, his will, and his energy to recover as soon as possible. At this moment, after going through such a long time, whether it was his power, will, or energy, they had all recovered to their peak state. With a single thought, the tens of thousands of different powers directly condensed into the auspicious cloud curtain outside his body in a profound and unfathomable way. They continued to wrap around the endless power that was descending from the sky. Although it had already shrunk by more than half, it still contained a power that was tens of millions of times stronger than his. This was where Luo Fan's advantage lay. The power of the auspicious cloud was only condensed from his own power. In terms of direct confrontation, it was far inferior to the will of the place of 5 elements, which could directly control the will of the place of 5 elements and condense power that was tens of millions of times stronger than Luo Fan's. However, at the same time, it was precisely because it was condensed from his own power that as long as Luo Fan recovered to his peak state, he would be able to condense it again easily. This curtain was not inferior in the slightest to the previous one. After it wrapped around the power, because it had already experienced it once, the various mysteries it used were even more exquisite and effective, and the effects were even more shocking. Finally, before the curtain became faintly discernible, seemingly illusory yet real, seemingly about to collapse at any time, the power that was tens of millions of times stronger than the power that Luo Fan possessed was finally completely eliminated. Only Luo Fan, the curtain, and the continent that was hundreds of thousands of feet wide existed in the entire space-time. The endless power seemed like it had never appeared in the first place. It had completely disappeared without a trace. If someone who wasn't confident saw this scene, they might even suspect that the powerful bombardment from before was just an illusion. I've gathered all my power to attack it, but I still failed in the end. Luo Fan sighed as a strange expression appeared on his face. At that moment, even though this space-time seemed no different from before, as if nothing had happened, he could easily sense that in another space-time, the space-time he was in before he entered this space-time, the space-time he was in after he stepped into the 5 elements danger ground, had undergone an earth-shattering change. V/.